I remember the first time I saw the sign for Mirage Point. It didn't even look real, just a sun-faded plank of wood nailed to a rusted post at the edge of a two-lane desert road, the kind of road that seems to hum from heat alone. The letters had bled out from decades of exposure, warped by dust storms and sunlight, but somehow I could still make out the words, Mirage Point Campground, open year-round. My name's Evan Pierce, 34, and I've spent most of my free time the last few years traveling across the American Southwest in a restored 1978 Volkswagen Westfalia. I bought it after my father passed away, a kind of therapy on wheels. He was a long-haul driver, and growing up, he always said, "The desert will tell you who you really are." I didn't know what that meant until I started camping alone. Out there where silence feels heavier than sound, you start hearing yourself more clearly. And sometimes that's not a good thing. That afternoon, the air was shimmering hard, bending the horizon like liquid glass. I had been driving west from Quartzsite for hours, looking for a primitive site that didn't show up on any of the park maps. My GPS had lost signal miles back, but the old Rand McNally atlas I kept in the glove box marked a spot called Mirage Point. No online record, no reviews, nothing but a small black dot beside a wash labeled Dry River Gulch. That kind of mystery pulls me in every time. When I turned off the highway, the road narrowed to a washboard gravel path lined with cholla and brittle sage. The sun dropped behind the jagged peaks to the south, and shadows stretched like cracks across the desert floor. Dust trailed behind my van like smoke, and for the first time that day, I started to feel the temperature fall. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of cooling that feels like something's holding its breath. The road led into a shallow basin surrounded by low sandstone ridges. I expected to find a sign, a fence, some kind of marker, but there was nothing. Just a faded asphalt loop half swallowed by sand and a few rotted picnic tables sinking into the dust. The silence was total. Even the crickets and wind seemed to have gone elsewhere. My headlights caught the glint of something reflective, an old aluminum sign fallen over near a cluster of dead mesquite trees. I got out, brushing the sweat and grit off my neck, and read what was left of the letters. Mirage Point Campground, Estade 1971, closed to public. That last part was painted over in red, almost angrily, but the paint had peeled back so the words still bled through. I should have turned around right there. But I didn't. I parked in the loop and stepped out into the dry hush. The air felt wrong, heavy and still, the kind that makes your ears ring. The silence in the desert can be strange sometimes, like it's listening back. I walked to the edge of the camp where the cracked pavement ended and the sand took over. There were outlines of old fire rings, tire ruts turned to fossils, and a single outhouse half buried in the dune. Everything about the place looked abandoned for decades. But the strangest part was that there were footprints, fresh ones, leading away from the site and into the open desert. They weren't deep, just faint impressions of boots or shoes, spaced unevenly, like whoever made them was walking in circles or staggering. I followed them for maybe 20 yards before the wind erased them completely. When I turned back, my van looked smaller than I remembered, almost toy-like against the emptiness. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was faint, like warm metal and something burnt. I thought it was the van's engine at first. Overheating oil, maybe? But when I walked closer, the smell got stronger away from the vehicle, drifting from the basin toward the ridge. I felt this strange urge to see where it came from, not out of fear, but curiosity, that blind curiosity that gets people lost. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the ridge. The sand crunched under my boots, each step echoing farther than it should have. About halfway there, I noticed the light seemed weaker than it should be. The beam faded in and out, flickering across the stones like something was interfering with it. I checked the batteries. They were fine. When I looked up, I saw it, a faint shimmer above the ridge, like heat distortion, even though the temperature had dropped. It rippled and wavered, forming what looked like the glow of campfire light, soft and flickering. the kind that pulls you in. The smell of burning metal grew stronger. I climbed the ridge, and as I reached the top, my stomach tightened. Below me, tucked into a hollow in the rock, was another campground, identical to the one I'd parked in. Same picnic tables, same asphalt loop, same dead mesquite trees. But this one was lit. Lanterns glowed faintly around the loop, and in the middle a small fire burned, throwing light against the sand. For a second, I thought maybe some off-grid campers had set up down there, but something was off. The flames didn't flicker naturally. They bent sideways like the air was trying to swallow them. And around the fire, I saw figures, 3 or 4 of them, sitting in silence. They weren't moving. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I tried calling out, "Hey, you guys camped out down there?" But my voice just disappeared. No echo, no answer. The figures didn't move. I took a step closer and felt the temperature drop again, sharp this time, like walking into a freezer. My flashlight dimmed, and for a moment I thought I saw the fire bend toward me, stretching like a reflection in water. That's when I realized what I was looking at wasn't really there. It was like staring through glass. The light, the fire, even the people, they all shimmered faintly, as if projected from another time. One of the figures turned, and I swear, it looked directly at me. Just a silhouette, but I could see the glint of eyes catching the firelight. My stomach dropped. The smell of burning metal turned sickly sweet, and I stumbled backward down the ridge, my legs shaking. When I hit the bottom, the light vanished. The ridge went black, and the desert went silent again. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, the taste of dust in my mouth. I tried to tell myself it was just heat distortion, some optical illusion caused by exhaustion. I'd been driving all day, dehydrated, maybe even hallucinating. I went back to the van, locked the doors, and sat behind the wheel, staring out into the darkness. But the desert wasn't still anymore. Every few minutes, I'd hear something faint, not footsteps, not exactly, but movement, like sand shifting under weight. Once, it sounded like a low hum, mechanical, deep in the ground. I left the headlights on for a while until the battery gauge started to dip. Then I shut everything off, sat back, and tried to sleep. That's when I heard it, a soft tap on the driver's side window. At first, I thought it was just sand hitting the glass, the way wind sometimes carries grit across the surface at night. But the sound came again, 3 distinct taps, slow and deliberate, like someone testing to see if I was awake. My throat tightened. I sat completely still, afraid even to breathe. The desert outside was pitch black, my headlights off, my flashlight sitting uselessly on the passenger seat. I leaned forward slowly, just enough to glance toward the driver's window. Nothing. Only the faint outline of the desert through the glass, washed in moonlight. But I could feel it. Something was there, right on the other side. A presence. You know that instinctive awareness when someone stands too close behind you? That electric awareness. It was like that, except it came from outside. The third tap came again, harder this time. My entire body tensed. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping it toward the window. The beam hit the glass, catching something pale, something like the shape of a hand, pressed against the outside of the window pane. It was gone the moment the light touched it. Just gone. I froze, listening. Nothing but silence again. No footsteps, no rustling, not even wind. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I whispered out loud, almost to steady myself, "It's the heat. You're seeing things. It's the heat." But I didn't believe it. I turned the ignition key just enough to roll up the windows fully and lock the doors. My van had always been my refuge, the one place I felt safe no matter where I parked. That night, it felt like a coffin. I stayed like that for hours, staring out the windshield. The desert was alive with stillness, if that makes sense. The kind of stillness that breathes. I must have drifted off sometime before dawn because I woke up to the sound of something scraping the metal on the van's roof. A slow drag, like nails or branches being pulled across it. I jumped upright and hit my head on the pop-top ceiling. "Hello?" I shouted without thinking. The scraping stopped instantly. When I got out of the van, the sun was rising, turning the sand the color of rust. My mouth was dry, and my tongue felt swollen. I walked a circle around the van, expecting to see scratch marks, but there weren't any. The roof was clean, no dust disturbed, no tracks leading up to it. But in the sand, right by the driver's side door, there were footprints again. Bare feet. They circled the van once, stopping at each window. I backed up, my chest tightening. I told myself I was leaving right then, that I'd drive back to the highway and forget this place even existed. I threw open the driver's door, turned the ignition, and nothing happened. The engine coughed once and died. The battery light blinked weakly on the dash. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the smell again. It came through the vents, faint at first, then stronger, the same burnt metal scent from the night before. It didn't smell like oil or fuel. It smelled wrong. I got out and lifted the rear hatch, checking the engine compartment, but everything looked normal. No smoke, no leak, no sign of heat damage, and yet the air shimmered faintly around the van, like the heat waves were trapped even in the cool morning air. I started packing up, ready to push the van downhill if I had to. I looked up at the ridge, the same one where I'd seen the Mirage fire the night before, and froze. There was smoke rising from it. Not the faint distortion kind, not imaginary. Actual smoke. A thin, dark column twisting into the sky. I grabbed my camera from the passenger seat, habit more than sense, and began hiking toward the ridge. Every step felt heavier, as if the air thickened the closer I got. The smoke moved strangely, not drifting with the wind, but spiraling straight upward. I climbed to the top and stopped, breathless. The hollow below was empty again. No fire, no figures, nothing but ash scattered across the ground. And in the center of it, half buried in the sand, was a shape. I knelt down. It was a hubcap, old Volkswagen style, my exact make and model. The chrome was blackened, warped by heat. Someone had been here before me. The sun was higher now, blinding. When I stood up, I saw the strangest thing yet. Down below, where my van should have been, there was nothing. No vehicle, no tire tracks, just flat sand and a dark impression where it had been parked. I started running back down the ridge, calling out, "Hello, anyone there?" But the only sound that came back was my own voice bouncing off the rock walls. When I reached the basin, the van was there again, exactly where I'd left it. But something about the color seemed off, like the green paint had faded overnight. The license plate looked older, too. Rusted around the edges. My head spun. I touched the metal. It was ice cold, even in the heat. The smell of burnt metal hung thicker now, clinging to the air. I got in, turned the ignition one last time, and the engine started immediately. I drove fast, bouncing over the gravel, not caring about the shocks or the noise. The only goal was distance. When I reached the highway, I didn't look back. I drove for hours without stopping, until the desert turned to scrub, then into the faint green of farmland. By the time I reached a gas station on the edge of Blythe, the sun was setting again. I pulled over, shaky but relieved, and went inside to fill up. The clerk was a woman in her 50s, long gray braid, weathered skin. She looked at my van as I parked and gave a little frown. "Haven't seen one of those around here in a long time," she said. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a laugh. "Been camping out off the old highway." She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Where'd you stop?" "Place called Mirage Point," I said, still catching my breath. Sign said it was open year-round. The woman's face went pale. "Mirage Point?" She repeated quietly. "That campground burned down in 1979. No one goes out there anymore." I froze. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Whatever you saw, it wasn't the living." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, bought a bottle of water, and stepped outside into the cooling dusk. The van sat there humming softly, engine ticking from the heat. I reached for the driver's door and noticed something glinting on the ground beneath it. It was another hubcap. Blackened, warped, identical to the one I found on the ridge. I stared at the hubcap, half buried in dust, as the last of the daylight burned away behind the gas station. It looked just like the one I'd found up on the ridge, the same warped edges, the same half-melted chrome. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. It was ice cold, just like the van had been that morning, and the moment I touched it, a sound bloomed in my ears, a low hum, mechanical, like an idling engine echoing from far away. I dropped it instantly. The hum stopped. The air around the van seemed to ripple, as if the heat from the asphalt was alive. I crouched down to look under it, half expecting to see smoke or a leak, but there was nothing. No damage, no reason for that smell, which still clung faintly to the air, that metallic sweetness that shouldn't belong anywhere in the desert. I climbed back into the driver's seat and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I kept repeating the woman's words in my head, burned down in 1979. I turned on my phone, hoping for signal. The map app loaded slowly, blinking through static. When it finally found my location, I zoomed out, tracing the route I'd taken. The map showed the old desert highway, the dirt turnoff, the ridges, but the name Mirage Point wasn't there. Not even as a ruin or a landmark, just blank space. I zoomed in again, desperate, and that's when I saw it. The screen flickered once, and for a fraction of a second, a label appeared where the basin had been. Mirage Point Campground, closed. Then it vanished. The map went white. I dropped the phone on the passenger seat and started the engine again. The van coughed, then settled into that slow, uneven rhythm unique to old Volkswagens, the sound that had always been my comfort on the road. But that night it didn't feel comforting. It felt wrong, off-tempo, like it wasn't just an engine running, but something else breathing in sync with me. I pulled onto the highway, driving east this time, back toward the lights of the nearest town. The stars began to rise, the sky a deep cobalt dome stretching endlessly overhead. The road ahead shimmered, heat still bleeding off the pavement. And then, for a split second, I saw headlights behind me. Another vehicle. I thought maybe someone else had pulled off the highway earlier, maybe another camper. But when I checked my mirrors again, the lights were gone. 5 minutes later, they appeared again, closer this time. I felt my pulse spike. I pushed the gas pedal harder, though the van wasn't built for speed. The headlights followed, keeping perfect distance. I could make out a faint shape now. A rounded front, a flat windshield. My heart sank. It looked like another Volkswagen, same model, same year. I slowed slightly, hoping whoever it was would pass me. The road was empty except for us, and the silence pressed down between the hum of engines. But when I pulled to the side to let them overtake, the lights behind me vanished again. I stopped completely, rolled down the window, and listened. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind through the desert brush. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling. Then from somewhere behind me, faint, distant, came the sound of a horn. 2 short blasts, friendly, almost cheerful. It was the same horn sound my van made. I floored it. I don't know how long I drove. Could have been an hour, could have been half the night. The highway twisted through canyons and dry riverbeds, the darkness alive with mirages that shimmered just out of reach. I tried not to look at them, tried not to see the flickers of firelight that kept appearing on the distant ridges, or the faint glow of lanterns that winked out as soon as I focused on them. When I finally saw the sign for a rest stop, I pulled in. The lot was empty. A single sodium light flickered over the vending machines, buzzing like a trapped insect. I parked beneath it and turned off the engine, sitting in the half-light, my mind spinning between exhaustion and disbelief. When I got out, I noticed something new. The dust on the back of my van, the layer that usually built up after long desert drives, was gone. Completely gone, like the vehicle had been washed. Except for one thing. Drawn across the back window, traced with a finger, were 3 words, "You came back." I stumbled backward, my chest tightening. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I swept it around the lot. Empty. Not a single car, not a sound but the buzzing light. My first instinct was to wipe the words away, but I couldn't bring myself to touch them. I just stood there, staring at my own reflection in the glass, barely able to recognize myself through the layer of fear. Finally, I got back inside, locked the doors, and reclined the seat. I told myself I'd rest for an hour, then keep driving until sunrise. But when I closed my eyes, the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. The hum was back, faint, mechanical, somewhere deep inside the van. At first, I thought it was just the fan or a loose belt, but then it started syncing with my breathing. Every inhale, it grew louder. Every exhale, it softened, like something learning how to breathe with me. When I opened my eyes again, the windows were fogged, and on the inside of the windshield, written through the mist, was a shape, a handprint. I turned the key immediately, the engine catching on the first try. I pulled back onto the highway and didn't stop until I hit the state line. But here's the thing. When I got home the next day, bone-tired and ready to collapse, I checked the photos on my camera, the ones I'd taken at Mirage Point. Every single one was corrupted, except one. It was the shot I took from the ridge, the hollow below, empty and lifeless. Only now there was something new in the photo. A figure standing beside my van, its outline blurry but unmistakably human. And beneath it in the sand, half buried but shining faintly, was a hubcap. I zoomed in on that photo again and again until the pixels bled into one another. The figure's shape refused to resolve clearly. It hovered between shadow and human form, as if the camera had caught something it wasn't built to interpret. But it was there, right beside my van, hand on the door, staring straight toward the ridge where I'd stood. The timestamp said 2:43 a.m. I hadn't taken any photos after sundown. I sat there at my kitchen table for what felt like an hour, the morning light pouring through the blinds, cutting across the lens of my laptop. The desert still clung to me. That smell of iron and heat, the kind that sticks to the inside of your nose. I could still feel the hum somewhere deep in my bones. I shut the laptop, stood up, and walked outside just to breathe. The van was parked in the driveway. From a distance, it looked fine. Ordinary. But when I got closer, I noticed it. A faint scorch mark curling along the bottom edge of the rear panel, right where the engine sat. The metal felt cool, yet when I pressed my palm against it, it pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of something sleeping. For the first time since I'd started camping, I felt afraid of the thing that had always been my shelter. I told myself I needed sleep, that everything would make sense after rest. But that night, when I lay in bed, I kept hearing the creak of metal, faint, rhythmic, coming from the driveway, like weight shifting back and forth inside the van. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. At some point near dawn, the noise stopped, and in that silence, I swore I heard a voice. Soft, low, almost like a whisper inside my skull rather than through my ears. It said my name, once, then nothing. I didn't go outside until the sun was high enough to burn away the chill. When I finally stepped into the yard, the van's door was unlocked. I always lock it. Always. Inside, everything looked the same except for one thing. Sitting on the passenger seat, perfectly centered, was that same warped hubcap from the gas station. I picked it up. The smell hit me instantly. Burnt metal, sweet, chemical, wrong. I stumbled back, dropping it to the floor. The moment it hit, the van's radio flickered on by itself, static first, then a faint voice buried underneath. I couldn't make out the words at first, just fragments, fading in and out through the interference. I reached in and turned the volume knob slowly, returning to point, welcome back. The static swallowed the rest. I yanked the key from the ignition and backed away. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something from Mirage Point had followed me. The nights grew restless. The hum came and went, sometimes faint, sometimes so loud it rattled dishes in the cupboard. Lights flickered without reason. My phone would buzz with unknown numbers, all blank calls. Once I answered and all I heard was wind, that same dry desert wind carrying the faint crackle of fire. I tried to move past it, to rationalize it. But then the van started moving. It was small at first, a few inches backward one night, then forward the next. I marked the tires with chalk to be sure. The marks never matched come morning. I checked the transmission, the parking brake, even chalked the wheels. Didn't matter. Every dawn it shifted. One evening, near the end of the week, I decided to end it, to drive it to a mechanic and sell it no matter the price. I started the engine one last time, The dashboard lights flickered, dimmed, and then, for just a heartbeat, the odometer rolled backward, not forward, and the radio turned on again. No static this time, just a single, steady voice. Calm, almost human. "Evan, you shouldn't have left." The words froze me where I sat. My name, spoken like it remembered me. The radio clicked off by itself. I didn't drive it to the mechanic. I didn't even take the keys out. I left the van where it was, engine idling until the tank ran dry and the sound faded to silence. That night, I slept on the couch with the curtains closed and the lights on. When I woke up the next morning, the driveway was empty. No van, no oil stains, no tracks in the dirt. I called the police. They thought it was stolen. They wrote a report, promised to contact me if they found anything. Weeks passed. Nothing. I tried to move on. Bought an old pickup, told myself I was done with camping, with chasing forgotten places. But then, last week, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, sun-faded, edges burnt. It was my van, parked in that same hollow basin at Mirage Point. Lanterns burning around it, figures sitting by the fire, and this time, one of them wasn't just looking at the camera. He was standing beside the van door, hand resting on the handle. My face, my clothes, me, staring straight into the lens. I dropped the photo, and when I bent to pick it up, I saw writing on the back, handwritten in black ink. The desert remembers who it owns. I don't camp anymore. I don't drive past the old highways, but sometimes late at night, when the world's quiet, I hear that hum again, faint, far off, like an old Volkswagen idling just beyond the horizon, waiting for me to come back. And sometimes when the wind shifts just right, it carries the smell of burnt metal. That's when I know Mirage Point is still out there. Waiting. The first time I saw the reflection move, I thought it was the sunset playing tricks on me. My name's Evan Clark, and that evening I was parked alone off Highway 101, just north of a little coastal town called Jenner, California. I'd been driving my old Winnebago for most of the day, trying to outrun something that didn't have a name yet. The ocean had that gray, steely color it gets before dusk, and the wind pressed hard against the RV, moaning through every seal and vent. I'd been living out of that rig for 3 months by then, half freedom, half exile. I told people I was taking time off work, traveling, chasing inspiration. The truth was simpler and sadder. I just couldn't sleep in the house anymore. Not since Leah died. The road was narrow, with cliffs dropping straight into the sea. I'd found a turnout where a few other travelers used to stop, a stretch of gravel and dying coastal grass, but that night it was empty. Just my Winnebago, the ocean, and that wind that never seemed to rest. I was sitting in the driver's seat eating cold soup from the can when I caught the reflection. Not in the mirror, no, it was in the passenger side window. The glass was darkened by the light inside, so I could see my own face, the steering wheel, and beyond that, the faint shimmer of the ocean. But then there was something else, a flicker, like someone sitting in the passenger seat, just for a second, then gone. It wasn't clear, not even enough to make out a shape. Just a presence, a distortion, the way heat bends the air. I froze, the spoon halfway to my mouth, and stared at that window for a long time. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably a trick of the reflection, maybe my own motion or the ocean light outside. I'd been on edge for weeks anyway, the kind of raw tension that makes you startle at your own shadow. I wiped the condensation off the glass, forcing myself to breathe evenly, and got ready to turn in. But something in me didn't want to close the blinds. I left them half open, just enough to see the shimmer of the horizon, just enough to keep that window in sight. That night, the wind got worse. Around midnight, it began to hit the RV broadside, making the whole vehicle rock gently. It wasn't enough to be dangerous, but it was enough to keep me awake. I turned in my sleeping bag, eyes half open, listening to the groan of metal and the scrape of branches against the roof. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard what sounded like a knock. Just one, soft from the passenger side. Then silence. I waited, every muscle locked. Then another knock. Two, spaced apart, faint enough that I questioned if I'd heard them at all. I sat up, holding my breath. The clock on the wall read 1:47 a.m. I whispered Leah's name before I even realized I'd done it. I knew it was crazy. She'd been gone 6 months, but something about the rhythm of those knocks reminded me of her. When we used to drive together, she'd tap twice on the dashboard when she wanted me to pull over for a view. It had been a quiet code between us. Tap, tap. Stop here. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the thud of my heart. Then the third knock came. Harder, sharper, definitely from outside. I grabbed my flashlight and slid from the bed. My breath made fog in the cold air as I opened the side door. The beam of light cut across the gravel, the tall grass, the cliff edge beyond. Nothing. Just the wind tearing at the night. I shined the light over the passenger window, half expecting to see someone standing there. No one. But the glass, there was something about it that stopped me cold. A faint smear, almost like the outline of fingers. 5 of them. I touched the glass and felt the cold bite straight through me. The prints were on the inside. The next morning, the world looked different. Brighter, calmer. The wind had died. The ocean was still. I tried to shake off the night before, convincing myself I'd somehow made the marks myself without realizing. Grief does strange things. You start to see what you miss most in the corners of the world, even in your own reflection. I drove down into Jenner, grabbed coffee at a roadside cafe, and listened to the locals talk about the weather. One old man, sun-leathered and half-blind, told me not to camp too long near the cliffs. "Wind'll drive you mad out there," he said, tapping his temple. "You start hearing the ones who didn't make it home." I laughed politely, but something about his tone stayed with me. That phrase, the ones who didn't make it home. By evening, I was back at the same turnout, parked in the same place. I don't know why I went back. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe something deeper. The view was too beautiful to leave behind, and I told myself I wasn't going to be chased away by a bad night's sleep and my own imagination. The sun sank behind the horizon in a fire of red and gold, and for a moment everything was peaceful again. But as darkness crept in, I started to notice the reflection returning. Only this time, it didn't flicker. It stayed. A shape sitting in the passenger seat, just faint enough to seem impossible, but clear enough to make my blood run cold. I didn't look at it directly. I watched it from the edge of my vision while pretending to stare out at the ocean. Every instinct screamed at me not to move, not to breathe. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. The shape was wrong, smaller than my frame, shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly as if looking back at me. I whispered Leah's name again, quietly, as if speaking it too loud would break whatever fragile thread of reality held this moment together. The reflection shifted, ever so slightly, like someone turning to listen. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. When I looked again, the seat was empty. My own reflection stared back. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and turned off the interior light, plunging the cabin into darkness. Only the faint blue of the moon came through the window now, silvering the edges of the dashboard. I waited, staring at the glass, half expecting the reflection to return. It didn't, not then. But just before I fell asleep, I caught the faintest sound again, a double tap on the dashboard. Tap, tap, and the ocean, vast and black beyond the cliff, whispered something back that I couldn't quite hear. The next morning, I woke up with the strange taste of salt in my mouth and the heavy pressure of a dream I couldn't remember. The ocean outside was calm again, almost too calm, the surface so flat it looked like a pane of glass. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, sipping instant coffee, staring at that passenger window. The sunlight poured through it, clean and sharp, showing nothing unusual. No handprints, no condensation, no movement. Still, I felt like something had shifted, like I wasn't alone in that space anymore, even if the air looked still. By noon, I was restless. I decided to drive inland, away from the cliffs. There was a small campground on the other side of the ridge, tucked between cypress trees and dunes, a few miles from an old decommissioned lighthouse. It looked quiet, safe, But as I drove, I kept catching glimpses in the corner of my eye, shadows shifting in the reflection of the window like someone sitting beside me. I tried to focus on the road. Every time I looked directly, there was nothing there. Halfway up the ridge, my radio crackled to life, though it had been off. Static first, then what sounded like a faint voice. I turned the dial, thinking maybe it had picked up a CB channel or a weather broadcast, but the words, if they were words, seemed wrong. Stretched, drawn out, a whisper that sounded like it was trapped inside metal. I leaned closer, trying to catch it, when the reflection in the window moved again. This time it was clearer. Someone sitting upright, face turned toward the windshield, hair falling forward just enough that I couldn't see the eyes. I hit the brakes hard, the RV jerking to a stop in the gravel. The reflection vanished. For a long minute, I just sat there with the engine idling. My pulse was thudding in my throat. I forced myself to turn and look at the passenger seat. It was empty. I turned off the engine and opened the window to breathe. But the air smelled different, wet and metallic like rust or old pennies. The kind of scent that doesn't belong near the ocean. I wiped my face and laughed a little, just to hear something human in the space. "You're losing it, Evan," I said out loud. "Get a grip." But when I turned back toward the windshield, there was something written in the condensation near the bottom of the glass. Just 3 letters. LEA. I didn't breathe for nearly 10 seconds. My throat closed up, and all I could do was stare. It wasn't possible. There hadn't been any condensation before. The sun was high, and the windows were warm. I reached out, shaking, and ran my fingers over the letters. They smeared instantly, but the feeling underneath, cold like touching ice, lingered on my skin. I sat there for hours, trying to make sense of it. Grief, memory, coincidence, whatever it was, I needed distance. I drove onto the lighthouse campground and parked at the far edge, away from the few other RVs scattered around. There were picnic tables, a pit toilet, and a single coastal trail leading down to the shore. It should have felt peaceful, but the silence pressed too tight. Every sound seemed distant. The caw of gulls, the soft tick of the cooling engine, the faint hiss of the tide below. I told myself I'd take a walk to clear my head. The path wound through thick grass and wind-bent cypress trees, and I could hear the waves thundering below long before I saw them. The lighthouse was about half a mile down, fenced off and half collapsed, but still standing. As I walked, I kept noticing a reflection in the corner of my vision, flashes of light as if something metallic was catching the sun. I thought it might be shards of glass from the lighthouse, but they always vanished when I looked straight on. Near the cliff's edge, I found something I hadn't expected. An old VW bus, half buried in sand and grass, stripped of paint and rusted through, the windshield shattered. It must have been there for decades, abandoned to the wind and salt. But what caught my eye wasn't the van itself. It was the passenger side window. The glass was still intact, though fogged white from inside, and in it, I saw my reflection perfectly. Perfectly, except for one thing. There was another reflection beside me, sitting in the passenger seat of that empty van, a woman's outline, hair brushing her shoulder, looking out to sea. I stumbled back, my heel slipping in the sand. When I looked again, the glass was blank, just empty fog. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. I stepped closer, pressed my palm to the window, and the chill bit into my skin again. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I did anyway. "Leah?" Nothing. Just the wind pushing through the grass. I walked back to the RV fast, every instinct screaming at me to get inside and lock the doors. The sky was darkening by the time I got back, the sun sinking low and throwing red light across the windshield. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the passenger side. That's when I saw it again, the faint outline in the glass. Not outside, not inside. Just there. As if the reflection itself was alive, suspended in the window between two worlds. This time I didn't move, I just whispered, "If that's you, if you're really there, what do you want?" The engine made a soft pop as it cooled. Then came a tap. 2, spaced perfectly. Tap, tap. I felt my chest tighten so hard it hurt. Tears came before I even realized it. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me," I said. "You're gone, Leah. You have to let me go." The reflection tilted its head slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw her mouth move. But the sound that came next wasn't words. It was a long, low groan from the ocean below, like the tide had swallowed something vast. The whole RV shuddered, and when I blinked, the reflection was gone. The window was just a window again. But from that night on, I couldn't look at the passenger side without seeing something waiting in it. Sometimes a blur, sometimes a shape, sometimes just the faint pressure of another presence breathing against the glass. And I started to wonder if maybe Leah wasn't haunting me out of malice or grief, but out of memory. Maybe she wasn't stuck there at all. Maybe I was. That night, the rain came in heavy bursts, hammering against the roof of the RV until it drowned out almost everything else. I tried to tell myself the sound was comforting, that it meant the world outside was too full of life for anything ghostly to linger, but I didn't believe it. The wipers dragged across the windshield with a tired rhythm, and each time lightning flashed, I caught the same faint distortion in the passenger window. Not a face this time, just a smear of light, like someone breathing too close to the glass. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and drove down to the ranger station I'd passed earlier that day. It was barely visible in the rain, just a square of dim yellow light through the trees. A sign on the gate read, "Closed for season," but the door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and coffee gone stale. A map covered one wall, showing the coastline and several marked points, campgrounds, trails, and accident sites. That word caught my eye. Accidents. A handwritten note was pinned near the bottom of the map beside a red circle. Fog crash, 2 fatalities, April 14th. The location matched the cliff turnout where I'd first parked. I leaned closer, tracing the date with my finger. April 14th. Leah had died April 14th. Not in a crash, at least not one anyone ever found. Her car had gone missing on a stretch of highway south of here. For months, the police said she'd likely gone off the road into the sea. They never found the wreck. My stomach turned. I stepped back from the map, realizing my hands were shaking. On the desk nearby lay a stack of weather logs. The top page dated the week she disappeared. In the margin, someone had scrawled a note. High surf. Coastal erosion worsening. Recommend closing northern overlook turnout. I knew exactly which overlook that was. The one where I'd parked the night I first saw her reflection. I left the station as thunder rolled across the cliffs. My flashlight beam flickered through the rain, catching droplets that seemed to hang in the air like static. Every gust of wind felt like it was pushing me back toward the RV, as if the night itself didn't want me wandering too far from what was coming. When I climbed back inside, the smell hit me first: seaweed and wet metal. The cabin lights flickered. The passenger window was fogged over completely, and in the mist, a single line was drawn with a fingertip. Look, I froze. The letters began to blur as the condensation thickened, like they were melting away. My chest tightened with a cold electric fear that wasn't quite terror anymore. It was something closer to knowing. I turned slowly toward the windshield. The rain had stopped. The world outside was silver with moonlight, the kind that makes everything shimmer like it's underwater. And that's when I saw it. Something glinting near the cliff's edge, maybe 20 yards from where I'd parked. I opened the door, stepped out into the wet grass, and followed the light. The ground was slick, the wind biting at my face, and I could hear the ocean breaking below, harder than before. When I reached the edge, I saw the light's source. A small piece of glass, half buried in mud. It was a side mirror, old, rusted, and streaked with salt. I turned it over, brushing away the dirt, and saw a logo faintly etched into the frame. Volkswagen. My heart nearly stopped. Leah's van had been a blue '79 Volkswagen Westphalia. I used to tease her about how much she loved that thing, how she'd rather camp in it than any hotel. I looked back toward the ocean and realized the cliff here had collapsed in sections, fresh breaks in the soil, jagged lines where the earth had fallen away. If her van had gone off this road, it would have been right here. Lightning cracked across the sky, and for a split second I saw something below, a glint of metal between the waves, half hidden by rock and seaweed. The outline was unmistakable. A roof, a curved frame, a door half open and swinging with the tide. The ocean roared louder, pulling at the debris like it wanted to bury it again. I stumbled back, breath tearing from my lungs. I wanted to believe it was a trick of light or my guilt finally boiling over, but I knew better. Leah's van was down there. It had been all along. When I got back inside the RV, I was soaked and shaking. I sat in the driver's seat, dripping water onto the floor, staring at the passenger window. For the first time, there was no reflection at all, not even mine. The glass was perfectly clear, showing only the storm-lit sea beyond. I whispered her name again, quieter this time, not out of fear but something else. Leah, I found you. The window fogged slowly, as if someone was leaning close from the other side. A faint shape took form in the glass, her outline, just as I remembered, shoulders narrow, head tilted, watching me. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. I felt tears run hot down my face. I rested my palm against the glass, and for a moment, it wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, faint, but real. The light flickered once overhead, then steadied. I whispered, "It's okay now. You can go." The reflection blinked. Then she was gone. The glass cleared, and all that was left was my own face, pale and hollow, staring back at me. The storm passed by morning. The world smelled clean again, washed new. I called the authorities, told them what I'd found. They sent a rescue team down the cliffs that afternoon. I watched from the turnout as they hauled up what was left of the blue van, crusted in salt and coral. They didn't find much inside, just a rusted ring of keys and a water-damaged photograph. It was one I'd taken years ago. Leah sitting in the passenger seat of that same van, sunlight on her hair, her hand pressed to the window in a half wave. When they left, I stayed behind. The wind was calm now, the ocean slow and breathing. I sat in the RV and looked at the passenger window one last time. For the first time since she died, it showed nothing but the sea and sky. No reflection, no movement, just light. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. The road ahead looked open, and when I started the engine, the sound of it felt like something alive again. Still, as I pulled away, I couldn't help but glance once at that window. Not in fear, but in quiet understanding, because maybe she never meant to haunt me. Maybe she'd just been waiting for me to look, really look, and see what I'd been refusing to face. That even the departed can linger, not in the places they died, but in the reflections of those who still remember them. I've learned over the years that silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's the echo left behind by something that doesn't want to be disturbed. My name's Luke Marshall. I'm 42 years old, and I've been traveling the back roads of America in my RV for almost a decade. I started doing it after my divorce, when the walls of my old life started to feel like a cage. At first, the open road felt like freedom. Every sunrise out my window promised another place to start over. But what they don't tell you about full-time RV living is how quickly the line between solitude and isolation starts to blur. I've stayed in hundreds of campgrounds, some sparkling new, others weathered and forgotten. But there are places scattered across this country that time is abandoned, where nature is slowly reclaiming what man once built. And it's those places that have a certain weight. You feel it in your chest before you ever park. You step out, smell the damp air, and realize the world's gone quiet in a way that doesn't feel natural. It started with an accident of curiosity, a wrong turn that turned into something I still can't fully explain. Last spring, I was driving through northern Arizona, somewhere along an old highway that peeled off from Route 66. My GPS flickered in and out like it couldn't decide what century it was in. The sun was dropping fast, and I didn't want to push into the desert at night. I passed a weather-beaten wooden sign half swallowed by mesquite that said Sunset Mesa RV Park. Vacancy. The arrow pointed down a cracked asphalt road leading toward a dry wash. I almost kept driving. Almost. But I'd been on the road all day. My eyes ached, and the thought of pulling over anywhere with RV Park in the name felt like salvation. The entrance was strangled with weeds, but a rusted gate stood open. I eased through, crunching over gravel that hadn't seen a vehicle in years. There were maybe 15 concrete pads, a few overturned picnic tables, and the skeletal remains of a sign near the office that read, "Check in here." The windows were dusted, opaque, but the door hung slightly ajar. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. At first, I thought maybe it was one of those forgotten roadside parks, closed after the new highway rerouted traffic. But something about it didn't add up. The place wasn't just old, it was frozen. There were still ashtrays sitting on picnic tables. A faded string of Christmas lights hung from a post, one bulb swaying in the wind like someone had left in a hurry. I remember thinking, maybe I should leave. But my fuel was low, and the nearest town was 30 miles behind me. I parked near the middle lot, leveled the RV, and stepped outside to stretch. The desert smelled of rust and creosote. The air had that electric stillness right before dusk. I walked toward the office to see if I could at least find a name or contact number, anything to ease the weird guilt of camping somewhere that technically wasn't open. The front office smelled of dust and disuse. A layer of grit covered everything, brochures, an unplugged coffee pot, even a plastic fern that had gone the color of bone. On the counter was a ledger, pages curled with age. The last entry was dated June 3rd, 1999. Beside it, a set of RV license plate numbers scribbled in a looping hand, one of them marked with a red X. I don't know why that unsettled me. Maybe because it felt personal. Like whoever wrote it had a reason to mark that one entry out. I told myself I was being ridiculous and went back outside. The sun had dipped below the hills, and a cold wind picked up across the park. The flagpole at the entrance whined against its metal clips. My own RV door creaked as it shifted in the breeze. I cooked a quick meal, canned chili and instant rice, and ate with the TV off. Something about sound, even artificial sound, felt wrong here. When I turned in for the night, the temperature had dropped hard. I cracked the window for air, pulled the covers up, and told myself I'd be gone first thing in the morning. But around midnight, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps on gravel. Slow, measured, moving just outside the RV. I froze. The footsteps paused, then continued toward the rear bumper. My mind jumped to every logical explanation, an animal, a drifter, maybe a park worker doing rounds even though no one had been there in decades. I leaned up just enough to peek through the blinds. Nothing. The lot was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. Then came the tapping. 3 sharp raps against the back wall of my RV. I grabbed my flashlight, heart hammering, and stepped outside barefoot. The cold bit instantly into my soles. The beam cut through the darkness, catching nothing but the pale shimmer of gravel and the outline of the old office. No movement, no shadows, just that endless, heavy stillness. I circled the RV once. No tracks, not even mine. The wind had died completely. When I exhaled, the breath hung longer than it should have, like the air itself didn't want to let go. I went back inside, locked both doors, and left the flashlight on beside me. But sleep didn't come. Every so often, I'd hear faint clicks, like fingernails on metal. Once something brushed against the side of the vehicle, a dry, dragging sound like fabric scraping paint. I tried to convince myself it was just branches, but there weren't any trees near enough to reach. At 3:17 a.m., my phone screen lit up by itself. The GPS map had reopened, the cursor blinking over the same point I'd seen earlier, Sunset Mesa RV Park. But this time, underneath, a second line had appeared in faded gray text. Do not stay after midnight. I blinked hard. The message vanished. When dawn came, I stepped outside half expecting to see footprints, some proof that I hadn't gone crazy. The gravel looked undisturbed, except for one thing. Near the back bumper, in the thin layer of dust, were 2 long streaks, as though something had been dragged away. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't even check the engine oil. I just drove until the park was a blur in the rearview mirror. That should have been enough to make me stop chasing abandoned places. But it wasn't. If anything, it woke something in me, a curiosity I couldn't shake. Because here's the thing. Once you've felt a place that's truly empty, you start to notice the ones that aren't. And that's how I ended up at Pine Hollow Campground in Missouri 6 months later, a park that, according to every record I could find, was closed after a series of unexplained disappearances. But the locals never told me the full story, not until I was already parked there. Pine Hollow was the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were looking for it. And even then, you had to want it for the wrong reasons. It sat 10 miles off the main road, tucked behind a wall of sycamores that grew so thick their roots had split the pavement. The gate was chained open, sagging under its own rust, and a faded sign welcomed visitors with words that barely clung to the wood. Pine Hollow Campground, family memories since 1974. Someone had spray painted over the last word, turning memories into warnings. By then, I had convinced myself that the Arizona experience had been a one-off, just exhaustion, imagination, the byproduct of too many lonely nights on the road. So when a storm started brewing over the Ozarks that afternoon, I thought, why not? Shelter was shelter, and the place was already on my map. I parked in the old loop near the pond, a green, stagnant mirror with cattails and mosquitoes thick enough to hum. My tires sank slightly into the soft earth, and the air carried that metallic tang of rain and algae. As the light dimmed under bruised clouds, I stepped out and stretched my legs. The forest around the campground felt swollen with moisture, like it was breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a tree cracked under wind. I glanced toward the pond and caught a ripple that didn't match the wind's rhythm. Something small, maybe a frog or a fish, slipped beneath the surface, leaving behind concentric rings that drifted lazily outward. There were 12 sites arranged in a semicircle, each with a decaying post numbered in flaking white paint. I chose number 8. The electrical hookup was long dead, but I ran my generator for a while, letting its steady hum cut through the stillness. Inside, I brewed coffee and opened my laptop to look up more about Pine Hollow. The first article that came up was from a local paper dated 2006, 3 campers missing, park shuts down. The details were vague. No evidence of foul play, just 3 separate disappearances over 3 summers. Same time of year, no bodies found. The only quote from an official read, "Nature reclaims what we abandon." I remember leaning back in my chair, rereading that line. Outside, the rain started, a gentle tapping that soon became a downpour. It beat against the RV roof in erratic rhythms, sometimes soft, sometimes pounding, almost like it was adjusting to my breathing. I tried to ignore it, but that sound began to blend into something else, faint, hollow knocking from the rear storage compartment. I muted the TV. The noise came again, rhythmic now, as though something inside was shifting with purpose. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside into the storm. The cold rain hit like needles, soaking me before I even rounded the RV. The beam caught on the edge of the storage latch, rattling slightly in the wind. I crouched, checked it. It was locked tight. No animals, no movement. But then, from somewhere across the lot, I heard the faint creak of another RV door opening. I swung the light in that direction. The beam cut across the rain and caught the shape of an old Winnebago parked 2 sites over. One I hadn't noticed earlier. The door hung half open, swaying gently. Its windows were fogged from the inside, though there was no light, no sign of life. I stood there, rain dripping off my chin, every instinct screaming to go back inside. But curiosity, stupid, reckless curiosity, kept my feet moving forward. The Winnebago was ancient, its paint blistered and peeling, a family of lichen climbing up its side. The door groaned as I pushed it open farther. The smell hit first, stale rot mixed with something faintly sweet like spoiled fruit. I stepped inside, the flashlight beam dancing across old furnishings. A blanket was spread neatly over the couch. On the counter sat 2 tin coffee mugs, both half full of water that had long gone stagnant, and beside them a map of the campground with several sites circled in red marker, including mine. I froze. In the silence that followed, A single droplet of rainwater hit the metal sink with a sharp ping, then another. And then from somewhere behind the RV outside in the woods came the low groan of something moving. Not animal, not mechanical. A sound stretched too long to belong to either. I backed out slowly, scanning the tree line. The rain had softened to a mist, and the forest steamed with that eerie after-storm glow. I saw nothing, but I felt watched. Back in my own RV, I locked every latch, every door, and sat listening. The generator coughed and died sometime after midnight. When the silence hit, it was like the air pressed down harder. My ears rang in the absence of sound. Then came a new noise, light, deliberate scraping beneath the RV floor. At first, I thought it was a branch rubbing the undercarriage, but then I realized the RV was rocking slightly, something moving underneath. I crouched low, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The scraping stopped, and then knocking. 3 taps, from below. I lunged for the driver's seat, started the ignition, and threw it in reverse. The wheels spun uselessly in the mud before catching, jerking the RV backward. Something thudded beneath me, heavy enough to rattle the cupboards. I didn't stop driving until the trees thinned and the road rejoined the main highway. The storm had passed, and the night sky broke open with stars. I pulled over at a gas station 20 miles away, still trembling. When I stepped out to check the undercarriage, I found nothing. No damage, no drag marks. But on the side panel just below the door was a single muddy handprint. I told myself it could have been mine from earlier. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. After that night, I swore I'd never stop anywhere that wasn't on an active registry again. I told myself I'd had my fill of ghosts, whatever they were. But habits die hard, and curiosity has a way of sounding like logic when you're alone. So when a retired ranger I met in Colorado mentioned a place up north, an RV park that never officially closed but no one stayed in twice, I didn't tell him no. I asked for directions. And 3 weeks later, I found myself driving toward Lake Shale Campground, a place so remote it didn't even exist on Google Maps. Lake Shale wasn't supposed to be beautiful, not in the traditional sense. It was the kind of beauty that warned you to keep your distance, an untouched stillness that didn't need you there. The old ranger, a man named Harris, had described it as peaceful in the way empty hospitals are peaceful. I laughed when he said that. I shouldn't have. The road leading in was narrow, unmarked, and overgrown with pine needles that muffled the sound of my tires. My GPS lost signal 5 miles back, but the map Harris had sketched on a napkin was surprisingly accurate. When I reached the sign, half-collapsed, painted letters nearly erased by time, it read Lake Shale Recreation Area, established 1958. Beneath it, another smaller sign leaned in the weeds, closed for maintenance. That phrase again. Always maintenance. I rolled through the gate and found the place swallowed by forest. Pines pressed close on all sides, their branches whispering with the sound of dry rain. The lake itself glimmered through the trees, a slate-gray oval, perfectly still, reflecting the clouds like a mirror that didn't want to give anything back. I parked near what used to be the main loop, the sites sunken and cracked, their picnic tables devoured by moss. An old restroom building stood crooked at the hill's base, its doors hanging open like a mouth mid-breath. The first thing that struck me was the quiet. Even the birds were gone. I've spent enough nights in the wilderness to know that when nature goes silent, something's off. Still, I stepped out, camera in hand. I told myself this was research. I'd been writing blog posts lately about forgotten RV parks, trying to document what remained before nature erased them completely. Maybe in some small way, I was trying to justify my obsession, to turn it into work instead of addiction. The ground was soft with pine needles, and every step released the smell of damp wood. The air tasted faintly metallic, like lake water mixed with rust. I followed an old path down toward the shoreline, where a few docks still jutted out into the water. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the mud. Fresh ones, barefoot. They led from the lake toward one of the campsites and disappeared near a fire pit choked with weeds. The prints were deep, spaced unevenly, as if the person had been limping, or dragging one foot. I crouched, touching the edge of one print. It was still wet. For the first time in a long while, I felt something cold press against the back of my neck that wasn't wind, the kind of sensation your body knows before your mind catches up. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe hikers still wandered through here. But there were no other tracks, no tire marks, no boot prints, nothing to suggest anyone else had been here in days, maybe weeks. Back at the RV, I brewed coffee and tried to shake the feeling. The sun was slipping low, painting the lake in copper and black. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window as I sat at the table, notebook open, writing down details like I always did. No birds. Fresh footprints. Smell of iron and air. I paused before writing the next part. Silence feels expectant. The pen hung above the page for a long moment before I set it down. I turned on the small lamp above the kitchen sink, the kind that hummed faintly when plugged into the inverter. Outside, the forest was now ink dark. A fog had started rising off the lake, drifting through the trees like slow-moving smoke. That's when I heard it. A single splash, then another. The kind of sound a person makes when wading into shallow water. I froze. The lamp's hum suddenly felt too loud. I switched it off. The silence returned, thicker now. My eyes adjusted to the dim, and through the window I could just make out the faint ripple of movement near the dock. Someone, or something, was standing at the edge of the lake. The fog made it impossible to see clearly, but the shape was unmistakably human. Still. Facing the water. I waited for them to move, to step forward or turn around, but they didn't. They just stood there. After a while, I convinced myself it must have been a trick of the mist. I blinked hard, and the figure seemed to dissolve. But when I finally lay down to sleep, the sound came back. Slow footsteps circling the RV. Not hurried, not cautious, just steady. Each step crunched softly against the pine needles. I held my breath, counting the seconds between them. The pattern stopped right outside my window. I reached over and pulled the curtain back, just enough to peek through the sliver. Nothing there. But on the glass, faintly visible in the condensation from my breath, were the marks of 5 long fingers pressed from the outside. I jolted back so fast, I hit the cabinet behind me. The sound must have startled whatever was out there, because the next thing I heard was a slow retreating rustle, followed by the faintest whisper of water lapping against shore. I didn't sleep after that. When dawn finally broke, the fog had thickened so much the lake was gone behind a wall of gray. I stepped outside, careful, scanning the ground. The prints from last night were gone, but new ones had appeared. Smaller, child-sized. They led from the waterline directly toward my RV door. I packed up faster than I ever have in my life. As I turned the ignition, I caught one last glimpse of the lake through the trees. For a split second, it looked like there were faces beneath the surface, eyes open, watching me leave. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, if you could call it that. Just a gas station, a diner, and a post office. I walked into the diner and ordered coffee, hands still trembling. The waitress, an older woman with silver hair tied in a braid, gave me one long look before asking where I was coming from. When I told her Lake Shale, her expression changed instantly. "You stayed there?" she asked, voice low. I nodded, unsure how much to say. She set the coffee down, her hand shaking slightly. "They drained that lake once," she said. "Back in the 80s. After a flood took out half the campsites, they found the RVs under the water. The people were still inside. No one ever figured out how they got there. Water rose too fast," they said. "But there's some things in those woods that move faster than storms." She left the cup and walked away before I could ask more. That night, as I parked miles from anywhere, I couldn't shake her words. Things that move faster than storms. I told myself I was done chasing these places. That whatever I'd been looking for, closure, thrill, understanding, it wasn't worth this. But you don't unsee things like that. You don't drive away from the dead and expect them not to follow, because sometimes they hitch a ride. It's strange the way silence can follow you. I used to think it belonged to a place, the empty lots, the overgrown trails, the waterlogged docks, but somewhere between Missouri and Montana, I realized it wasn't the parks that were haunted. It was me. After Lake Shale, the quiet took on a different weight. I could be parked at a modern, fully booked RV resort, kids playing two sites over, dogs barking, music spilling from someone's Bluetooth speaker, and still I'd hear it. The low humming kind of silence that lives behind sound, like a reminder, like something waiting to be noticed again. I tried to outrun it, drove through Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, but no matter how far I went, that feeling tagged along, sitting somewhere just behind my ribs. Then in late October, I came across the name Haven Creek RV Park. It popped up on an old camping forum I'd been scrolling through one night, the kind of thread that gets buried under years of unanswered posts. One user had written, "If you go to Haven Creek, don't camp near the river. The lights don't belong to anyone." That was all it said. No coordinates, no photos, just that one line. It should have been enough to deter me, but it didn't. Maybe because deep down I'd already accepted that I wasn't looking for safety anymore. I was looking for answers. It took 3 days of driving through back roads to find it. Haven Creek was somewhere near the Montana-Idaho border, nestled in a narrow canyon where the sun vanished hours before dusk. The road in was little more than a dirt trail, half washed out by rain, flanked by skeletal birch trees that leaned in like spectators. By the time I pulled in, it was almost dark. The campground sat in a shallow bowl of land, 20 or so sites spread around a central clearing where a rusted swing set still stood. The swings moved slightly, though the air was still. Beyond that, the river ran fast and low, a thin silver line cutting through the black pine. I stepped out into the chill and took a long breath. The smell of wet leaves and metal, the sound of the river faint but constant, like distant static. I told myself I'd just stay the night, record a few minutes of ambient audio for my blog. Leave before sunrise, but the moment I shut off the engine, I heard it again, the silence beneath everything. That night, I built a small fire outside, more for comfort than warmth. The flames flickered orange against the RV's side, painting shadows that bent and warped with each gust of wind. Somewhere across the river, an owl called. A clean, piercing note that broke the night open for a second. Then it stopped abruptly, as if cut off mid-call. The air around me thickened. The woods felt aware. I sat there, poking at the fire, when I noticed something in the periphery, a faint glimmer between the trees on the far side of the river. At first, I thought it was another camper's lantern, but it didn't move like a light should. It pulsed. Once, twice, then gone. I waited. 10 seconds. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, 3 more pulses, slow, deliberate, almost like breathing. I turned off my flashlight, trying to let my eyes adjust. The reflection on the river made it look like the light was underwater, drifting closer to the bank. Every hair on my neck stood up. The campfire popped behind me, and for a second I thought I heard movement, soft footsteps in the leaves just beyond the edge of the light. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing there. Just trees, the river, and fog starting to creep low through the brush. That's when I heard the whisper. Not clear. Not words exactly. Just a voice shape, the rise and fall of syllables that didn't make sense, coming from the other side of the river. I stood there frozen, my breath shallow. The light across the water flickered once more, brighter now, reflecting off something pale in the fog. A face. It was only there for an instant, but it was enough. It wasn't glowing. The light came from below it, casting shadows that stretched upward, hollowing the eye sockets into dark pools. The mouth hung slightly open, as if caught mid-breath. Then the light vanished. The whispering stopped, and the woods went dead silent. I stumbled back toward the RV, nearly tripping over the fire ring. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pulled the curtains tight. For hours, I sat at the small dinette table, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The river's rush had faded completely. Not slowed, stopped. When I finally dared to look again, it was just past 2 a.m. There were lights outside. Not one, several. Small, flickering, floating between the trees like fireflies, but moving too slow. Too deliberate. They drifted closer, one by one, crossing the river without disturbing the surface until they reached the edge of the campsite. I couldn't move. My hands were gripping the table so hard my knuckles ached. The lights gathered near the swing set. For a brief moment, they formed shapes, outlines of shoulders, heads, faces blurred by glow. Then they began to move in unison, swaying gently, back and forth, like they were imitating the swings. My throat went dry. I remember whispering out loud, "You're not real." The moment I said it, every light went out at once. A gust of air slammed against the RV, shaking it so hard the cupboards rattled. From somewhere deep outside came a long, drawn-out sound, like wind through a flute, but heavier. Wet, breathing, and then a knock. 1, 2, 3 on the side of the RV. I held perfectly still, counting my breaths. The knocks came again, this time lower, toward the wheel well. Something was touching the frame, moving slowly around to the door. Then came the whisper again. Closer, clearer. My name. I didn't remember ever saying it out loud in that place. I hit the ignition and floored it. The tires spun in mud, the whole rig lurching before it caught traction. I tore down the dirt road with the high beams on, trees whipping past like shadows trying to grab hold. When I glanced in the mirror, I saw it, faint pinpricks of light chasing behind me, keeping pace through the trees. They followed until the forest thinned and the highway opened up, and then, just like that, they were gone. I drove until sunrise. When I finally pulled into a rest stop outside Coeur d'Alene, I stepped out on shaking legs. The morning air was cold and clean. I walked around the RV checking for damage, telling myself it was all just a storm of nerves and imagination. But on the side panel, right where the knocks had come from, was a perfect handprint burned into the paint. Not blackened, not dirty, just faintly discolored, like something hot had pressed there and left part of itself behind. For weeks after Haven Creek, I couldn't bring myself to drive at night. Every small sound, the creak of suspension, the click of cooling metal, felt like something alive crawling back toward me. I'd pull off before dusk, park in the open near other travelers, and keep the interior lights burning until sleep forced them dark. But silence has a way of finding you when it wants to. It was somewhere in South Dakota at a clean, well-lit RV park near Rapid City that I realized it wasn't about the place anymore. It was about the pattern. Each abandoned site I'd stayed at, Sunset Mesa, Pine Hollow, Lake Shale, Haven Creek, had left something behind. Not just memory, energy, presence. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it building, layering itself over me like invisible dust. The handprint on the RV never faded. I tried scrubbing it, waxing it, painting over it. Each time it reappeared by morning, a faint shimmer under sunlight. One night, about a month later, I was parked near the edge of Badlands National Park. The view was stark and empty, the kind of land that looks like it remembers everything that's ever died on it. I'd chosen that spot on purpose, far from water, far from trees, far from anything that could whisper. I set up my small table outside, brewed coffee, and wrote in my journal. But no matter how many words I filled the pages with, none of them felt real. Every sentence started with "I remember" and ended with "but I'm not sure anymore." The wind carried the smell of rain and something faintly metallic, that same scent that had followed me since Arizona. As dusk settled, I saw movement on the horizon, a shimmer like heat off asphalt. I thought it was the wind at first, stirring the tall grass, but then the shimmer took shape, several shapes, and that's when I knew they had followed. The first figure stepped forward slowly, its outline half transparent in the fading light. It wasn't solid, but not entirely gone either, like the afterimage of a person burned into film. Its face flickered between familiarity and nothingness, features rearranging every time I blinked. Behind it, more forms appeared, their edges fraying into the wind. My mind tried to make sense of them. The man from the ledger in Arizona, the barefoot shadow at Pine Hollow, the pale figure at Lake Shale, the whispering lights from Haven Creek. They were all there, standing together now, watching. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the camp chair. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest sound. Not quite words, not quite wind. Just a chorus of overlapping whispers that bled into one another until my head ached trying to separate them. They didn't move closer. They didn't need to. I felt them inside me already, the weight of all those forgotten places, pressing against the inside of my skull like they were trying to remember themselves through me. For a moment, I thought I heard my own voice among them. Don't stay after midnight. The same words that had appeared on my GPS months before. I ran inside, slammed the door, locked it out of reflex, even though I knew locks didn't matter. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, whispering over and over, "You can't follow me. You can't follow me." The air inside thickened until it felt like breathing underwater. The interior lights dimmed, flickered, then died. Outside, the shapes stood in a circle around the RV. Faint light bled through the fog, pulsing in slow rhythm, syncing with my heartbeat. And then silence. Total. No wind. No engine hum. No sound at all. I don't remember starting the RV, but I must have, because the next thing I knew I was driving, headlights cutting through an endless gray, road unspooling beneath me like a thread pulled through fabric. I kept driving until the fog gave way to dawn, until my hands stopped shaking enough to realize I was still alive. When I finally stopped at a truck stop outside Sioux Falls, I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. There was a gray smear across my cheek, like the residue of ash or soot, in the shape of a hand, not mine. I washed it off, but my reflection didn't look the same. My eyes looked older, tired, haunted in a way that didn't come from fear, but from understanding. That morning, over black coffee and silence, I started piecing it together. Not the logic, but the meaning. Each abandoned park had been left behind for a reason. Floods, disappearances, accidents. But the truth felt older than that, buried beneath the paperwork and the excuses. People didn't just leave because they were afraid. They left because they heard something. Something that called to them when the world got quiet. Something that wanted to be remembered. I used to think the worst thing that could happen in an abandoned campground was getting lost. Now, I think it's being found. Because what if these places aren't haunted by the dead? What if they're haunted by memory itself? All the laughter, the fires, the footsteps, the arguments, the echo of living that never got resolved when people packed up and left. Maybe they cling to whoever stays long enough to listen. That's why I still travel. I can't stop. Not because I want to find more of them, but because I'm afraid if I ever stop, they'll finally catch up. Sometimes, late at night, when I park under a wide sky and the wind presses against the RV walls, I hear it again. Faint knocking, almost polite, like someone waiting for permission to come in. And I think about the people whose names filled that old ledger, the ones circled in red, the ones who never left. I think about how easy it is to disappear when you're always chasing what's already gone. There's a comfort in knowing that maybe they're not gone at all. Maybe they're just waiting for the next traveler who doesn't know when to turn back. And if that traveler happens to be me, then maybe the story doesn't end on the highway. Maybe it ends back where it started, at a forgotten gate in the desert under a sign that reads vacancy. Because in America's abandoned RV parks, there's always room for one more. And sometimes, when the fire dies low and the night grows still enough, I swear I can hear them whispering it. Stay. The first thing I remember about Silence Ridge wasn't the silence itself. It was the way sound seemed to fold inward, like air collapsing on itself. I had been driving for hours through the mountain backroads of southern Oregon, cutting through low fog that moved like smoke across the pines. My name's Mark Ellis. I'm 41, and for most of my life I've been an RVer, chasing solitude because I convinced myself it was peace. I bought the old Winnebago after my divorce, told myself I'd use it to rediscover what I'd lost, whatever that meant. By late September, I found myself heading toward a place locals only mentioned in passing, like a half-forgotten memory. Silence Ridge. They said radios stopped working there, that birds avoided it, that hunters got headaches when they crossed it. I didn't believe in stories like that. I'd slept in ghost towns and camped on land so remote the stars looked close enough to touch. But that name, it stuck with me. Silence Ridge. It sounded like something you could feel. I took Highway 62 until the last gas station faded behind me, then followed a gravel road that twisted through thinning trees. Every mile deeper felt heavier somehow. I turned off my music after a while because it didn't sound right. The speakers gave off a faint static and every word came out warped, like the singer was underwater. When I shut it off, the quiet was thick. It was the kind of silence that doesn't let sound leave your mouth. Even the tires over gravel sounded muted. The air smelled faintly metallic, like when rain hits rust, and my hands tightened on the wheel without realizing it. I told myself I was just tired. That's what I do when something feels off. Rationalize it away until I can't anymore. By late afternoon, I found a clearing wide enough to park. The ridge was about half a mile higher, hidden by mist that moved in long sheets. I stepped out, stretched my legs, and noticed that even the crunch of pine needles was soft, almost cushioned. I couldn't hear the wind, though I could see it moving through the branches. It felt like the world was running on a lower volume than I was. When I called out, just to test a small "hey" to hear my own voice, it came back distorted, like I'd shouted through glass. That was when I first felt the nausea start. It wasn't sickness exactly, more like my body was reacting to something it couldn't process. My ears rang faintly, and I thought maybe the altitude was messing with me. I made coffee, sat in one of my folding chairs, and tried to let the stillness feel peaceful. But it didn't. It felt like something was watching to see how long I could sit in it. After sunset, the world dimmed fast. I could still see the outline of the ridge above, just a darker shape against the fog. I set up a lantern beside the RV and listened for the night sounds that usually come with camping. Insects, frogs, the creak of cooling metal. Nothing. The silence didn't just continue, it deepened. It was like every sound had been swallowed. Even my breathing seemed far away. I turned the lantern up higher just to convince myself I was still grounded in something. When I moved, I could hear my own clothes rub faintly against my skin, but even that sound felt wrong. Too close, too contained. I remember whispering something out loud, maybe to break the spell. "You're fine, it's just altitude." But hearing my own voice echo back with no direction, no origin, it froze me. There was no bounce off the trees, no spatial sense. The sound existed only inside my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air pressure kept shifting, or maybe I imagined it. Sometimes it felt heavy, pressing against my chest. Other times it thinned out, leaving me dizzy. Around midnight, I got up and opened the RV door to get some air. The fog had thickened so much it looked solid. I could barely see the hood of my rig. But there was something about it that didn't look natural. It didn't move like fog. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, like a breath. My first thought was that headlights were shining through from the road, but there was no road in that direction. Then I realized the pulse wasn't light. It was vibration. The fog shimmered faintly, like invisible waves moving through it. And when I focused, I realized I couldn't hear my own heartbeat anymore. That broke me a little. I tried covering my ears, then pressing my hand to my chest, but there was nothing, no thump, no pulse. I was breathing, but my body felt detached from itself. I stumbled back inside and slammed the door. The sound of it closing came seconds late, like the air had to decide whether to let it exist. I sat there in the dark for a long time, gripping the wheel, trying to breathe evenly. The only thing that broke the silence was a low hum, distant but steady, like a generator somewhere in the fog. It wasn't mechanical, though. It had a rhythm, a slow oscillation that felt alive. I turned on the radio to drown it out, but all I got was static. No stations, just a high, droning hiss that rose and fell in perfect sync with that unseen pulse outside. When dawn finally came, the fog hadn't moved. It was pale and dense, the light diffused like I was underwater. I decided to pack up. Whatever peace I was chasing wasn't here. But when I turned the key, the RV didn't start. The engine made no sound, not even the attempt. The key turned, the dash lights flickered, but the ignition stayed silent. I stepped outside and tried shouting for help, but my voice didn't travel. It just hovered in front of me before dissolving. That was when I realized there were no tracks behind me. The gravel road I came in on had vanished under the fog. I could see maybe 5 feet before the world just stopped. I walked in circles trying to find the edge of the clearing, but it all felt the same. Every direction was swallowed in that white stillness. Then something moved at the ridgeline, tall, thin, barely visible through the haze. At first I thought it was a tree, but it was moving against the wind, slow, deliberate. I squinted and it tilted slightly, almost as if it was studying me. When I blinked, it was gone. The hum grew louder after that, vibrating in my chest like it was trying to replace the heartbeat I couldn't hear. I backed toward the RV and felt my legs trembling. There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream. It just empties you out until you can't think. That's what this was. I remember forcing myself to grab the map, to look for an alternate road. But when I spread it open, something had smudged the ink. The ridge's name, Silence Ridge, was still there, but the roads leading out were gone, erased clean. I stared at it, my hands shaking, until a faint tapping sound came from the outside wall of the RV. At first I thought maybe a branch was brushing it, but the taps were rhythmic. 3 short, 1 long, a pause. Then again, it was like someone was trying to communicate. The taps got slower, heavier, until I realized they weren't hitting the outside. They were coming from inside the wall itself. I pressed my ear against the panel, listening. Nothing. Just the faint hum, deeper now, as if it was under the ground. I whispered into the silence, asking who was there, but my voice sounded like someone else's. And then beneath that hum, I heard something impossible. Breathing. Slow, steady, like something enormous was exhaling beneath the earth. I could feel it vibrating through the floor. That was when I understood Silence Ridge wasn't named because there was no sound. It was named because the sound belonged to something else, something that decided when you were allowed to hear. I don't remember deciding to run, but suddenly I was outside again, the air dense and heavy against my skin. The fog was colder now, like standing in the mouth of a freezer, and the silence had weight, an actual pressure that made my thoughts feel muffled. Every step I took felt wrong, delayed, like I was walking through memory instead of ground. I tried calling out again, nothing. The sound of my voice barely existed past my own mouth. I couldn't even hear my footsteps. My brain started filling the gaps with phantom noise, snatches of wind, whispers that weren't real, the illusion of movement behind me. It was worse than any noise I'd ever known. Silence wasn't absence, it was distortion. It made me realize how much of being alive depended on hearing the world respond. I walked toward where I thought the ridge was, using the faint outline of the trees to orient myself. They looked wrong, too. Longer, thinner, as if stretched by distance. I reached out and touched one of them, but it wasn't bark. It was smooth, almost soft, like skin chilled by wind. I snatched my hand back and nearly fell over. The hum underneath me pulsed once, hard enough to make my knees buckle. I looked down and saw the ground tremble. Not like an earthquake, more like something was shifting underneath the dirt, adjusting itself. The air around me vibrated, and for a moment I thought I heard something, just a single fleeting sound. A low note, maybe a heartbeat, maybe a voice. It said nothing clear, just a shape of meaning that felt like, stay. I bolted back toward the RV, half blind through the fog. Every breath came in ragged gasps, but even those felt stolen, incomplete. When I reached the rig, it looked different. The color was off, more gray than white, like something had drained it. I climbed inside, slammed the door, and turned the key again. Still nothing. My reflection in the side mirror looked wrong too. I don't know how else to explain it. It was me, but the mouth didn't move right. The eyes blinked a second too late, and the background behind my reflection wasn't fog. It was a dark, endless plain, like the world outside had already been replaced. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe an hour, maybe 5 minutes. The clock on the dashboard had frozen. My phone showed no signal, just a blank bar where reception should be. Even the battery symbol didn't update. I remember thinking that if time could stop making sound, maybe it could stop moving too. I forced myself to start writing things down in my notebook, anything to prove I was still real, still marking something. But the pen didn't make a sound either, not even the scratch on paper. The hum kept rising and falling beneath me, always the same slow rhythm, like the earth itself was breathing me in. At some point, I decided to step outside again. I told myself I'd just walk a few yards, see if I could find where the road had gone. But when I opened the door, the fog had parted slightly. I could see the ridge clearly for the first time. It wasn't really a ridge at all. It was a long, narrow rise that curved upward like the back of something vast. The trees along its slope grew in perfect symmetry, too uniform for nature. And between them were gaps, openings that looked like windows or mouths. There was movement inside them, slow and deliberate. I could feel my pulse again, faint but present, as if whatever it was had decided to give it back to me. I don't remember deciding to climb, but I started up the slope anyway, like something was pulling me. The ground underfoot was soft, spongy. It didn't feel like dirt. Halfway up, I stopped and looked back. The RV looked impossibly small, like a toy left in the mist. That was when I noticed something else. There was another RV, half sunken into the ground just a few yards away, its windows fogged from the inside. It looked decades old, maybe from the 70s, its paint stripped to metal. I called out instinctively, forgetting that sound didn't travel here. Still, something inside moved. A shadow shifted behind the glass. I approached slowly. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. The air around it shimmered faintly, and I realized it wasn't covered in rust. It was something else, like the metal itself was breathing. I pressed my hand against the window, trying to see inside. For a second, my reflection stared back at me. Then another face appeared behind it. Pale, hollow-eyed. It looked exactly like mine, only older. Its lips moved soundlessly, forming words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, tripping over something half buried in the dirt. When I looked down, I realized it was a logbook. The cover was torn, waterlogged, but I could make out a name, Tom R. Ellis. Same last name as mine. I flipped through, but every page was blank, except one near the end. On it, written in smeared ink, were 5 words. When it stops, don't move. I didn't understand what it meant until I realized the hum had gone silent. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't heavy or distorted. It was total. Even my thoughts felt like they were being swallowed. I froze, every muscle in my body locking. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat again, but this time I knew better than to panic. The fog around me began to drift, forming shapes that weren't random. They coalesced into faint figures, dozens of them, standing motionless along the ridge, each facing me. Their outlines flickered like bad reception on an old TV. I tried to look away, but they were everywhere. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. The ground under my feet pulsed once, and one of the figures turned its head. The sound returned in a single, violent rush. Wind, trees, my own heartbeat pounding like thunder. I gasped and fell to my knees, clutching my head. The hum was gone, replaced by a ringing so high-pitched it made my vision blur. When it faded, the ridge was empty again. No figures, no fog, just the outline of trees in the morning light. I didn't question it. I ran. I didn't stop until the road appeared again, cracked and real beneath my boots. When I turned back, the ridge looked normal, just another patch of pine and stone, but I could still feel it humming somewhere beneath me, faint and steady. I drove until the tank was nearly empty, until the sound of the engine felt like music. When I finally stopped at a rest area, I noticed something strange. The radio was still on, though I hadn't touched it. No static this time, just a faint, low hum, repeating in a rhythm I knew by heart. It pulsed 3 short, 1 long. I turned it off, but the silence that followed didn't comfort me. It just waited. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've started hearing things again, at first faint, now clearer. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can feel the world breathing, slow, rhythmic, like it's waiting for me to stop making noise. I still drive, still chase the next campground, but I don't listen to music anymore. I can't. Every once in a while, I catch that same hum just beneath the engine noise, and every time it feels a little closer. I think Silence Ridge didn't want to keep me. I think it wanted to follow me. And sometimes when the world gets too quiet, I can feel the sound fading again, like it's testing me, deciding whether I'm ready to hear what comes next. 2 weeks after I left Silence Ridge, I found myself parked near a small town in Northern California, somewhere off Highway 299 between Redding and the Trinity Alps. I'd been trying to convince myself that what happened up there had been altitude sickness or stress or some kind of breakdown brought on by isolation. I told myself I'd go back to normal once I was around other people again. But even in town, surrounded by cars and voices, something about the world still felt muted. The sounds didn't fit right. Laughter from a cafe across the street came half a second too late, and the rhythm of traffic lights switching felt off-tempo, like reality was lagging behind. I was staying overnight at a small RV park behind a diner, one of those places that's more gravel than grass, where the neon sign buzzes all night. I remember sitting in the driver's seat with the window cracked, just listening to the hum of the highway, trying to ground myself. But then I realized the buzzing from the sign wasn't constant. It was pulsing, 3 short, 1 long, that pattern again. My stomach went cold. I turned off everything in the RV, radio, lights, engine, and just sat there in the dark, trying to tell myself it was coincidence. Around midnight, someone knocked on my door. 3 short, 1 long. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The air felt heavier, the same suffocating pressure I'd felt on the ridge. I told myself not to answer. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when silence starts feeling alive. I opened the door slowly, and a cold gust slipped in, carrying that faint metallic smell I'd tried so hard to forget. No one was there, just the diner sign flickering, the road glistening with mist. But on the gravel right outside my step were prints, bare feet, long and narrow, like someone had walked through dust and stopped just short of the door. The next morning, the owner of the RV park, an older guy named Harold, asked if I'd been running a generator last night. I told him no, and he nodded like he'd expected that answer. He said, "You hear the hum too, huh?" Then he pointed up toward the mountains. That's where it started. Folks say something up there eats the sound. When it lets go, it leaves a mark. He tapped his chest when he said it. In here. I asked him what he meant, but he just shrugged and walked off. Later, when I paid for another night, he slipped a folded note under my receipt. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were the same words from the journal I'd found near the ridge. When it stops, don't move. That night, the silence returned in stages. First, the wind outside slowed until it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then, the neon buzz from the diner flickered out. The hum beneath the ground began again, faint but rhythmic. 3 short, 1 long. My phone froze on the lock screen. The hands of my watch stopped, and for a moment I could swear I saw the air itself vibrate, like invisible waves passing through everything at once. I stepped outside before I could talk myself out of it. The entire RV park was washed in gray light, motionless. Every other rig was dark, doors shut, no movement inside. I whispered something, anything. Hello? But the sound didn't leave my mouth. It stayed right there, circling back like it didn't know where to go. Then I saw him, Harold, standing by the fence, motionless, his face turned toward the ridgeline in the distance. I walked closer, but the ground beneath me felt soft again, spongy, like it had on the ridge. When I reached him, he still hadn't blinked. His eyes were open, glassy, reflecting something I couldn't see. Then, faintly, I realized his lips were moving, but no sound came out. He was mouthing something on repeat. I leaned in close and caught the shape of the words, "It's listening." I backed away slowly, and that's when everything started moving again. The diner lights flicked back on, a truck engine roared somewhere nearby, and the world returned to sound like a switch had flipped. Harold blinked hard, gasped, and stumbled forward. He looked at me, confused, then down at the ground, like he was realizing he'd lost time. "It takes a piece of you," he whispered. "Every time it stops the sound, it takes a piece." I left before sunrise. Didn't pack much, just enough to get on the road fast. But the further I drove, the more I noticed it wasn't confined to the ridge anymore. The hum followed through the engine, through the tires, even through the air vents. Sometimes I'd hear it faintly when the world around me got too still. Inside tunnels, empty rest stops, gas stations in the dead of night. It always started the same way, a pulse, steady and slow, reminding me of something I couldn't see but could never forget. I've come to think of Silence Ridge as not a place, but a frequency, a range of sound or the lack of it that opens something between worlds. Maybe it's natural, like an acoustic phenomenon no one understands, or maybe it's alive, something that feeds on vibration, memory, breath. Whatever it is, it's spreading. And every time it finds me, it stays a little longer. A few nights ago, I woke up parked outside a Forest Service road near Lawson. The fog had rolled in again, thick and gray. My breath clouded the air, but I couldn't hear it. The world had gone quiet again. I froze, afraid to move, and then, from somewhere deep in the fog, I heard breathing. Not my own this time. Deep, rhythmic, impossibly low. It sounded like the ridge itself was alive, following me mile by mile. When it stopped, I didn't move. I remembered the warning. But after what felt like forever, I heard it again. Closer. And in that moment, I finally understood. Silence Ridge isn't waiting for people to come to it anymore. It's learning to travel through the quiet we create. Every time the world goes still, every time we hold our breath, every time the noise fades, it finds a way in. I keep driving. I keep the radio off. I talk to myself sometimes just to keep the air moving. Because I think if the silence ever gets complete again, if every sound disappears at once, it won't give anything back. Not the hum, not the air, not me. I've been on the road for months now, chasing motion for the sake of survival. I don't sleep more than a couple of hours at a time. When I do, I leave something running, the fan, the heater, anything that makes noise. I've learned that silence isn't rest, it's invitation. That's the rule I live by now. Don't give it stillness to enter, because once it does, it doesn't leave empty-handed. Last week, I drove south toward the desert, thinking maybe the dry air, the open space, the endless hum of the highway would drown it out. For a while, it worked. The noise of the tires over asphalt, the wind tearing past the windows, it almost felt normal. But then I realized something. The world itself is getting quieter. Towns feel emptier. People talk softer. Even the wind seems to hold back. It's like the silence is teaching the world how to mimic it. I stopped at a rest area outside Barstow one night just to stretch my legs. The parking lot lights buzzed faintly, a sound that comforted me more than I'd ever admit. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the dry air, thinking maybe this was the farthest I could get from it. Then, from the corner of the lot, I saw a familiar shape. An old RV, same make as mine, same faded stripe running along the side. I walked closer, slowly, my boots crunching on gravel that barely made a sound. The door was open just enough for the wind to nudge it. Inside, it was dark. I climbed the steps, shining my flashlight inside, and froze. On the wall near the kitchenette, written in thick black marker, were the words, "When it stops, don't move." Beneath it, taped to the counter, was a photograph. Grainy, decades old. It showed a man standing beside the same RV, smiling at the camera, holding a coffee mug. His name was scrawled on the back, Tom R. Ellis, 1978. That was the same name I'd found in the journal at the Ridge. The same name that matched my own last name. I looked around the cabin again and saw another photograph, this one half burned. It was me, or someone who looked exactly like me, standing beside a fog-shrouded mountain, my hand raised like I was waving. My flashlight flickered, and the hum began again. 3 short, 1 long. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. But as soon as I stepped out, the sound stopped. The air went dead still. I didn't move. Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew better now. I just stood there, eyes closed, waiting. The silence pressed against me, thick and cold, as if the world was holding its breath again. Then, faintly, I heard something move behind me, bare feet on gravel, slow and deliberate. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. A hand brushed my shoulder, light, careful, almost familiar. And then, right beside my ear, a whisper. It wasn't a voice, exactly. It was vibration shaped into words. You shouldn't have left. When sound returned, it came with violence. The wind roared through the lot, the RV door slammed shut, and I fell to my knees, gasping. The lights flickered back on. Everything looked the same, normal again. The other RV was gone, not driven away, gone, like it had never existed. But the gravel where I'd been standing was warm, as if something beneath it had just exhaled. Since that night, the hum hasn't stopped. It follows me in everything. The walls of the RV, the steering wheel, the engine's idle. It's faint, constant, pulsing like a heartbeat. Sometimes when I speak, I hear an echo that doesn't match what I said. A half-second later, my own voice repeats, but it isn't mine anymore. It's lower, slower, and it always says the same thing at the end. Stay. I've tried to record it. My phone picks up nothing. My dash cam shows hours of footage where the sound just cuts out completely, replaced by white static. But once, only once, it caught something else. A shadow standing on the edge of the frame, tall and narrow, tilting its head like it was listening. I think that's what it does. It listens. It studies the places where sound ends and begins again. Every pause, every silence between words, every moment we think we're alone, it learns the shape of us through the noise we make, and when it knows us well enough, it takes the rest. People say silence is peace, but peace doesn't hum beneath your skin. Peace doesn't wait for you to stop talking so it can crawl in through the quiet. I used to think I was running from a place. I'm starting to realize I was running from a pattern, a frequency that's been following my family for generations, maybe longer. So I keep driving. I stay awake. I fill the air with sound. Old tapes, static, anything that proves the world is still breathing. And if I ever hear that rhythm again, 3 short, 1 long, I'll know what it means. It won't be warning me this time. It'll be calling me back. And maybe when that happens, when sound finally stops existing, it won't be silence anymore. It'll be something deeper, something that listens back. I used to think bad luck was something you could outrun. Change the route, change the weather, change the company you keep, and maybe the universe gives you a clean slate. But if there's one thing I learned this October, it's that some debts follow you no matter how far your wheels take you. My name's Adam. I'm 39 years old, a former mechanic from Idaho who started RV living after the divorce. I didn't go full nomad because I wanted freedom. I went because I couldn't stand the sound of a house that had lost its laughter. The silence there was heavier than any engine problem I'd ever dealt with. So I bought a used 2006 Fleetwood Bounder, did the repairs myself, and started driving south, chasing campsites that promised solitude, not realizing solitude was exactly what I should have feared. It started in Nevada, early October, the kind of air that feels like it's both burning and freezing you at the same time. I'd been running from the kind of guilt that doesn't fade with distance, the kind you wake up remembering even when you try to forget. My ex-wife used to call me stubborn, said I never believed in signs. Maybe she was right. Because there were signs everywhere before it started. I just didn't want to see them. I was parked near a place locals called Echo Ridge, just a flat expanse of desert bordered by low, crooked hills. There wasn't even an official campground, just a dirt pullout big enough for 1 or 2 rigs. I'd found it on a forum post from an RVer who said it was quiet, free, and forgotten by rangers. That last part was the only one that appealed to me. Forgotten places always feel like mercy when you're trying to disappear. That first night, I cooked over a small propane stove, watched the stars stretch across the sky like an open wound, and told myself this trip was about starting over. But something about the place didn't sit right. The silence wasn't natural. It pressed in on you, had deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. No coyotes, no wind, not even the hum of insects. Just stillness. Around midnight, I heard a knock on the side of the RV. Not loud, not aggressive, just one slow tap, tap, tap. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. There's a specific kind of fear that hits when you're alone in the desert, where sound travels weird, bending and stretching, and you can't trust what direction it came from. I waited, listened, nothing. I even told myself it might have been the metal cooling or the desert wind shifting through a vent, but I knew better. I've lived in RVs long enough to recognize the difference between wind and knuckles. I didn't open the door that night. I just sat there, every light off, hand on the nearest wrench, heart punching the inside of my chest until exhaustion finally dragged me down. When I woke, the world looked normal again. My footprints, the tire marks, the empty desert, all untouched. Except one thing. On the window, drawn in dust, were 3 faint streaks, like someone had brushed their fingers across it. I wiped it off, told myself it was nothing, and packed up to leave. But the generator wouldn't start. No big deal, I thought. I'd fixed dozens before, except this one should have worked. Every part was clean, the spark plug new, the wiring intact. Still, when I turned the key, nothing but silence. I spent most of that day bent under the hood, chasing an electrical gremlin that wasn't there. The sun burned through my neck and shoulders, sweat pooling in my eyes. By late afternoon, the wind picked up, one of those erratic desert gusts that feels like it's whispering. I could swear I heard it say something. My name, maybe. But when I turned, no one was there. When dusk came, I gave up. I'd sleep another night, leave at first light. That's when I saw it. A figure standing out beyond the ridge. It wasn't close enough to see details, just the outline of a person, motionless against the pink horizon. I waved, called out, "You okay out there?" The figure didn't move, didn't even shift its weight. It was like someone had placed a mannequin in the middle of the desert. I blinked, and it was gone. I don't remember going inside. I just remember locking every latch, drawing the curtains, and sitting at the dinette with the lights off, feeling my heartbeat echo in my throat. The silence returned, thicker this time. Then came the knocking again. Same rhythm. Same side of the RV. Tap, tap. I whispered to myself, "Don't open it. Don't you dare open it." But part of me needed to know, needed proof that it was just wind or a tree branch or anything that fit inside logic. I crept toward the door, one hand trembling on the knob. Then, right before I touched it, something whispered through the keyhole. "Adam." The sound was soft, female, but not like someone speaking from outside. It came from inside the metal, like the word was caught between worlds. I yanked my hand back, stumbled into the table, knocked over my lantern. The noise broke the silence so violently that I swear the air shifted, the whole RV creaking as if the desert itself exhaled. I grabbed the keys and tried the ignition again. Dead. The generator, the lights, the everything. Dead. So I waited out the night with nothing but the dark. By dawn, my eyes felt like sandpaper. I stepped outside, expecting to see footprints, maybe signs of a prank. But there was nothing. No marks near the door, no sign of movement, just an odd smell hanging in the air, sweet like decayed flowers. The same kind my ex used to leave in the house after fights, trying to cover the scent of anger. That smell followed me all morning. When the generator finally started, like it had never failed, I took it as a sign. I packed up fast, engine growling beneath me like a lifeline. But the road out wasn't the same road I came in on. I checked the GPS twice, 3 times, but it kept looping, rerouting me back toward Echo Ridge. The desert does that sometimes, tricks your sense of direction. But this wasn't confusion. It was as if the landscape didn't want me to leave. By the 3rd hour, the fuel gauge started dipping, and I realized I'd been circling the same set of rock formations. I pulled over to collect myself, to breathe, to remind myself that panic never fixed a damn thing. And that's when I saw the figure again, this time closer. Standing maybe 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a cluster of Joshua trees. And she was wearing my ex-wife's jacket, that torn, mustard-colored windbreaker she'd worn the last time I saw her, the night she said, "You care more about fixing engines than fixing us." The one I'd thrown out of the RV window in a fit of rage, somewhere along Highway 93. The sight of it sent my pulse into overdrive. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe someone found it. Maybe it was coincidence. But deep down, in that old mechanic's gut that used to tell me when an engine was about to fail, I knew. This wasn't coincidence. This was something I'd brought with me. She lifted her hands slowly, not waving, just pointing toward the ground. I followed her gesture and saw what looked like a patch of disturbed sand, a small mound about the size of a shallow grave. When I looked back up, she was gone. That was the moment I stopped denying it. Whatever this was, it wasn't about the RV. It wasn't about the desert. It was about me. And whatever I'd done or refused to face had finally caught up. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that patch of sand. The sun climbed higher, bleaching the desert flat and white, but I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to get in the driver's seat and floor it, but another voice, the quieter, heavier one that comes from somewhere under your ribs, told me to look. That's the thing about guilt. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And when it whispers long enough, you start listening. I stepped out of the RV, boots crunching over grit. The air shimmered with heat, and for a second I thought maybe the mound wasn't real, just a mirage. But as I knelt, my hands sank into the loose sand, and I felt it, something solid underneath. My stomach twisted. The world seemed to tilt. I started digging. The first thing I found was a piece of fabric, mustard yellow, frayed at the edges. Then, deeper down, a metal zipper. My breath caught. I pulled harder until I uncovered what looked like the sleeve of that same windbreaker. I froze, fingers trembling, dirt streaked with sweat. There was no body, thank God, but there was something else. A locket. One I'd given her years ago. It wasn't possible. I had thrown that jacket out in Utah, not Nevada. I dropped the locket like it burned me. The second it hit the ground, the wind kicked up out of nowhere, so violent it ripped grit into my eyes. Stinging had blinding. When I blinked again, the mound was gone. Flat. Like it had never existed. That's when I started to hear it again, the knocking. Not on the RV this time, but faint, rhythmic, coming from beneath the ground. I backed away fast, heart hammering, tripping over a rock. The knocking stopped the moment I fell. The silence that followed was worse, like the desert itself was holding its breath again, watching me, waiting for my next move. I scrambled back into the RV and slammed the door. Every instinct said to leave, no matter where I ended up. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the dirt road, kicking dust into the air like smoke from a burning bridge. For an hour, I drove blind. No map, no GPS signal, just raw panic steering my hands. When I finally reached a paved road, I pulled over to breathe. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I tried to tell myself I was safe now, that I'd made it out. But when I looked in the side mirror, the reflection didn't match. Behind me, the desert was still, lifeless. But in the mirror, I saw a figure standing right beside the RV, close enough that if I'd opened the door, I could have touched it. The reflection showed a woman, head tilted, eyes open too wide, mouth moving but making no sound, and she was still wearing that damn jacket. I turned around in a panic. No one there. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just felt hollow, like my mind was falling out through the bottom of me, because the truth hit me hard. It wasn't just guilt haunting me, it was karma, and it had a face. I drove until nightfall and pulled into a small RV park outside of Tonopah. The sign at the gate said Silver Acres. Half the spots were empty, the other half filled with rigs that looked like they hadn't moved in years. The kind of place where the manager's office has a single yellow light flickering in the window and a stack of old magazines on the counter. I paid cash and didn't make eye contact. The manager, a quiet old woman with a faded ranger cap, looked at me like she already knew something I didn't. "You from the ridge?" she asked, voice rasping like dry leaves. I froze. "What ridge?" She gave me this slow, knowing look. "Never mind. People who ask don't remember right. People who don't ask, they usually leave before the second night." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I didn't, because some part of me was terrified of the answer. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from the single light pole that buzzed like an angry insect. The air smelled faintly of sage and rusted metal. It should have felt safe. Civilization, power hookups, other people. But somehow it felt worse. The shadows here were longer, slower, like they were waiting for something too. That night, I tried to distract myself, cooked dinner, turned on the radio, scrolled through old photos on my phone. But when I reached the last picture of my ex, her standing beside the RV with that same windbreaker, the screen glitched. The photo shimmered like heat rising off asphalt, then froze. Her eyes in the photo seemed to shift just slightly to look right at me. I dropped the phone. The radio died. Then the knocking started again, not on the side this time, on the roof, 3 measured taps, then silence, then 3 more. I stood there under the skylight, staring up into the thin plastic, too afraid to move. The sound wasn't heavy, more like fingertips, gentle and deliberate. I waited, heart pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. The taps stopped. For a moment I thought it was over. Then something slid across the roof, slowly, like someone crawling. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but where? Out there into the dark, toward the manager's trailer that might not even be real? Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam hit the ceiling, and for a split second, a shadow passed across it. Long fingers, impossibly long, stretching past the edge of the skylight. I didn't think. I just ran. Out the door, barefoot, into the cold desert night. The lot was silent. The other RV stood dark. No lights, no sound. I turned in circles, trying to find movement, a person, anything alive. Then I heard it again. Soft footsteps on gravel, coming from behind my rig. I swung the flashlight around, and there she was. Or it. Same jacket, same hair, same stillness. Only this time her face wasn't human anymore. The skin around the mouth was stretched, eyes hollow, jaw trembling as if trying to form words it couldn't say. I stepped back. My breath came in ragged bursts. She raised her hand and pointed, again, toward the ground beneath the RV. And that's when I heard it. Knocking from underneath. I bolted. Ran across the lot toward the office, pounding on the door until my fists went numb. The old manager opened it halfway, eyes tired, unafraid. I started shouting, half coherent, about the thing under my RV, about the woman in the jacket, about the mound in the desert. She let me talk. Then she said, very calmly, "You shouldn't have stopped at Echo Ridge." My chest tightened. "What do you know about it?" "People go there to forget," she said. "They think it's a quiet place, but quiet isn't peace. It's payment. The land remembers what we try to bury." I must have looked insane, standing there shaking, dust on my face, flashlight trembling in my hand. She sighed, reached for something under the counter, a small paper map, edges yellowed and torn. "If you're smart," she said, "you'll leave before sunrise. Don't look back and don't dig. Whatever's under that rig, it's not yours to unearth." She shut the door before I could say another word. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the driver's seat, staring at the rearview mirror, watching for movement. Once, around 3 a.m, I thought I saw her again, standing in the empty field behind the park, hands hanging limp, head tilted. The jacket fluttered in a wind I couldn't feel. Then she slowly lowered herself to the ground, and the darkness swallowed her. By sunrise, I was gone. But as I merged back onto the highway, I glanced in the mirror out of instinct and froze. Because in the reflection, sitting quietly in the passenger seat beside me was the same mustard yellow windbreaker, folded neatly, like someone had left it there for me to wear. I didn't touch the jacket. I drove for hours without stopping, gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The jacket sat there quietly in the passenger seat like an accusation, neatly folded, never slipping, never moving, even when I hit rough patches of road. I tried not to look at it, but my eyes kept flicking back, the way your gaze always returns to a wound just to check if it's bleeding again. I told myself I'd throw it out at the next gas station, that I'd open the window, toss it onto the asphalt, and drive on without looking back. Simple as that. But every time I reached for it, my hand froze mid-air. like something deep in my brain whispered, "Don't touch what's already claimed you." By the time I reached the outskirts of Bishop, California, the sun was setting behind the mountains. The clouds turned the color of bruised fruit. I pulled into a small roadside rest area. 3 picnic tables, a single bathroom, and a rusted vending machine that buzzed like it was full of bees. There were no other RVs, no cars, just the hiss of wind sliding through the sagebrush. I parked under the one working streetlight and finally turned to face the jacket. The air inside the cab felt thick, almost humid, like someone had been breathing beside me for hours. I reached out again, slower this time, and brushed my fingers against the fabric. It was warm. Not the kind of warmth left by the sun. This was fresh, like someone had just been wearing it. I yanked my hand back, heart thundering. The jacket shifted slightly, just enough for the locket to fall out and clink onto the floor. I stared at it, chest tight. The same locket I'd seen buried in the sand, the one that shouldn't exist. I picked it up and it was cold as ice. I didn't even realize tears were running down my face until they hit the metal. All the anger, the guilt, the way I'd driven across states trying to convince myself I'd done nothing wrong, it came crashing down right there on that lonely highway turnout. I whispered her name for the first time in 2 years. Lydia. The locket clicked open on its own. Inside was a photo, but not the one I remembered. Not the smiling picture we'd taken outside Yellowstone the summer before we split. This one was different. She was sitting inside this RV wearing that jacket, eyes wide, expression frozen halfway between fear and sorrow. Behind her, just barely visible in the reflection of the window, was my silhouette, watching her. I threw the locket to the floor. Breathing hard, it slid under the passenger seat, out of sight. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Then I reached up, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road. I didn't have a destination anymore. I just needed movement, distance between me and whatever was following. But deep down, I knew I wasn't running from Echo Ridge anymore. I was running from myself. Somewhere around midnight, the radio turned on by itself. A soft crackle, then static, then an old country song I hadn't heard in years, her favorite one. The voice came through warped, like it was playing from underwater. I'll be waiting at the turn. Love. I slammed the knob to off. The static only got louder. My headlights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a faint glow. I pulled over on instinct, half afraid the battery was dying, half afraid of what would happen if I kept driving blind into the dark. The moment the RV stopped, I felt it again. That thick, charged air, the one that hums right before a thunderstorm. I turned off the ignition, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The silence hit me like a wall. No insects, no wind, just the faint hum of the engine cooling behind me. My flashlight beam cut across the asphalt into the desert beyond. That's when I saw movement. Not walking, crawling. Something pale dragging itself across the dirt about 30 feet away, half hidden behind a yucca plant. My throat closed up. I should have run, I knew that. But fear has this strange way of making you curious, like your mind needs proof of what your body already knows. I stepped closer, the beam trembling in my hand. It was her, Lydia, or what was left of her. Her body looked half translucent, like smoke caught in a human shape. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then her arm lifted, slow, deliberate, and pointed behind me. I spun around, light slicing through the dark, and froze. There was another RV, identical to mine. Same color, same dents, even the same Idaho plates. Its headlights were off, but I could see movement inside. Shadows pacing behind the curtain. My breath stuttered. I stepped forward, drawn like a moth to a flame, unable to stop myself. The closer I got, the colder the air became. When I reached the door, I could hear something inside. Not movement this time. Breathing. I raised my hand to knock, and the door swung open on its own. Inside, everything was the same as my RV. Every sticker on the fridge, every scratch on the counter. But the smell was different. Damp earth, mildew, and that faint sweetness again, like decayed flowers. And sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, was me. He didn't look up, just kept his eyes forward, jaw tight, knuckles white. like I was watching a recording of myself trying to leave Echo Ridge all over again. I whispered, "What the hell?" And he finally turned. The eyes weren't mine. They were black and bottomless. He spoke, but it wasn't my voice. It was hers. "You left me here." I stumbled backward, tripping down the steps, crashing onto the gravel. The door slammed shut. The headlights of the duplicate RV flashed once, flooding the desert in blinding light. And when they cut out, it was gone. I scrambled back to my rig, shaking so hard I could barely fit the key in the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I drove like a man possessed. My chest hurt, my throat raw from screaming at nothing. I didn't know what was real anymore. The road looked endless, looping, the same landmarks appearing again and again. Every few miles, I'd glance in the mirror and swear I saw another RV behind me, matching my speed exactly. By the time dawn broke, I found myself at the edge of a small town. The sign said Lone Mesa, population 127. I parked near a diner that looked like it hadn't been open in years. My reflection in the window looked like a ghost, sunken eyes, cracked lips, a man eaten from the inside out by something he couldn't name. When I stepped out, the air smelled like rain. First time in days I'd smelled something clean. And then I saw her again. Not the ghostly version, not the twisted shadow, just Lydia, standing across the street in the early light. Whole, normal, smiling that small, tired smile she used to give me when we were still trying to fix things. She lifted her hand, not pointing this time, but waving, and for a second I believed I could walk across that road and everything would end. The guilt, the fear, the silence. Maybe that was the trap. Maybe that was the mercy. I blinked, and she was gone. Only the wind moved where she'd stood. I climbed back into the RV. The jacket was gone from the seat. In its place lay the locket, open. Inside, the picture had changed again. It was me, alone. And behind me, written in the dust on the window, were 3 words: "Don't stop again." I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I'd see her face. Sometimes alive, sometimes decayed, sometimes not even human. The line between dream and memory had started to blur. The road stretched endlessly, a looping ribbon of asphalt that seemed to hum under the tires like it was alive. I stopped recognizing the names of the towns I passed, and sometimes the GPS would show places that didn't exist. Echo Ridge, it would whisper again, no matter how far I drove. I started to wonder if I'd ever actually left that place. By the 3rd night, my nerves were shot. I was jumpy, sweating through my shirt, every creak of the RV sounding like footsteps. When I reached a remote campground near the base of the White Mountains, I told myself I'd rest for one night. Just one. A man can only run on adrenaline for so long before something breaks. The sign read, Hollow Creek Camp Self-Check-In. There was no attendant, just a rusted drop box and a faded map. I picked spot number 7 because it was the farthest from everyone else. Maybe I still believed distance equaled safety. The trees here leaned too close to the road, like they'd been growing toward the sound of engines for decades. I backed into the spot, shut off the motor, and just sat there for a minute, feeling the silence expand around me. The stillness felt watchful, like the air itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. I stepped outside, stretched my legs, tried to breathe in something that didn't smell like fear. The campground was empty, except for a few abandoned picnic tables and an old Airstream with flat tires. The moon hung low, a pale bruise behind the trees. The wind moved through the branches in uneven sighs, and for a second I could almost hear her voice riding on it. I shook my head hard. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself. "That's all." But the thing about exhaustion is it makes you honest, and honesty hurts, because the truth was simple. I'd brought this on myself. Lydia hadn't haunted me because she died. She haunted me because of how she died. 2 years ago, we were parked outside Twin Falls. We'd had another fight over money, over trust, over everything that had built up into something too big to name. She stormed out into the dark. I let her go, told myself she'd cool off, come back, like always. But that night, a drunk driver hit her on the side of the highway, not even a mile from camp. I never forgave myself for letting her walk out that door, but I also never faced it. I packed up, sold the house, hit the road, and told myself I was moving on. Truth was, I was running from the moment I closed that door and heard her footsteps fade into the dark. Now I was sitting here in another campground, October air freezing my breath, realizing that maybe the thing knocking on my RV all this time wasn't her ghost at all. Maybe it was my conscience, and maybe the universe had decided it was time to stop ignoring it. I made a fire that night. The flames cracked weakly in the damp wood, painting the trees in uneven light. I poured a cup of whiskey and stared into it until my reflection blurred. "I'm sorry," I said out loud. The words barely came out. They sounded too small, too late. And then, somewhere in the woods, a voice answered. "Then prove it." I froze. The voice wasn't behind me or around me. It was inside the air, like it had been waiting between heartbeats for me to say those words. I turned toward the trees. Nothing, just darkness shifting slightly with the wind. "Lydia," I whispered. A shadow moved near the airstream. Slow, careful. Someone or something was walking around it. My first thought was another camper, but there were no footsteps, no crunch of gravel, just the faint swish of fabric brushing bark. I grabbed my flashlight, heart hammering, and followed the sound. The beam cut through the trees, catching glimpses of movement. I saw her again, standing beside the airstream, hand pressed to the metal like she was listening through it. She looked over her shoulder and her eyes caught the light, reflective, animal-like, not human anymore. She spoke without moving her lips. The words slid through my head, not my ears. "You left the door open." Then she stepped backward through the airstream wall like it was made of mist. My knees nearly gave out. Every part of me screamed to run, but I forced myself to take one step forward, then another. When I reached the airstream door, it swung open before I touched it. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and wet earth. My light flickered across the walls, and my stomach dropped. The entire interior was lined with photographs, hundreds of them taped over every surface. All of me. Me at gas stations, me driving, me sitting by campfires I didn't remember, and every single one of them had the same faint reflection behind me, Lydia, watching. In the center of the airstream was a single chair. On it lay the mustard yellow jacket, freshly washed, folded perfectly. My flashlight went out. I didn't scream this time, just stood there in the dark, trembling, breathing so hard it hurt. Then, faintly, I heard it again, the knocking. Not from the RV, not from the ground, from inside the chair. 3 slow taps. I reached out. My hand shook as I lifted the jacket. Beneath it was the locket, and under that, a Polaroid photo. It was of me, kneeling in front of that same mound in the desert. Only this time, the photo showed what was beneath the sand, a shape, human, curled in on itself, and I was smiling. My mind broke a little in that moment. My memory flickered, snapshots flashing out of order, Lydia shouting, my hands on her shoulders, the sound of something hitting metal, the long drive after, dust, wind, the way I told myself she just walked away. Maybe I didn't want to remember the rest. The voice returned, closer now inside my head. "You said you'd never let me leave." I dropped everything and ran. Out of the airstream, through the trees, tripping over roots and rocks until I could see the faint glow of my RV through the brush. I threw the door open, jumped inside, slammed it shut, gasping. The lights flickered to life without me touching anything. Every surface of the RV was covered in photographs now, too. The same ones. Me. Always me. Trapped in some endless memory loop. The radio clicked on again. Static filled the air. Then, through the noise, her voice, "You can't drive away from what you buried." The RV shook violently, like something had grabbed it from below. I screamed, reaching for the ignition, slamming it into gear. The tires spun in mud that hadn't been there before. The walls creaked, groaned, the air filled with that sweet, rotten scent again. My chest burned. The windshield fogged from the inside, words appearing one letter at a time. "Finish what you started." The knocking came again. Roof, door, floor, all at once. I hit the gas, the engine screamed, and finally the RV lurched forward, tearing through the campground road, branches scraping against the sides like claws. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't breathe until the trees thinned, and I saw the open highway again. I drove until sunrise. When I finally pulled over, exhausted, shaking, the world was quiet again. No photos, no smell, just the hum of the engine cooling and the faint whistle of wind through the vents. I looked to the passenger seat, empty, no jacket, no locket. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Maybe she was gone. Maybe I'd finally faced what I needed to. Maybe. Then I glanced in the mirror. Behind me, carved faintly into the dust on the rear window, were 3 words. You're almost home. Home. The word hit harder than I expected. I hadn't said that word in years. Home stopped being a place for me the night Lydia died. It became a sound, a ghost of something I didn't believe in anymore. And yet, there it was, written in dust like a promise or a warning. You're almost home. I sat in the driver's seat for what felt like hours, engine idling, sunlight creeping across the dashboard. The longer I stared at those words, the less sure I became of what home even meant. The RV had been my shelter, my escape, my punishment. Maybe home wasn't a place anymore. Maybe it was a truth I'd been running from. I took the next exit without thinking. The sign said Twin Falls, 22 miles. By the time I saw it, it was too late to turn back. The same road, the same bridges, the same stretch of asphalt where it had happened. The memories that I'd forced down for 2 years started clawing their way back up. I could see her walking ahead of me that night, Lydia, arms folded tight against the cold, muttering under her breath while I stood in the doorway, too proud to say I was sorry. I remembered her stopping at the edge of the road, turning back once, eyes full of something I didn't deserve. Then the sound of the engine roaring away, and silence after. When I reached the old turnout by the bridge, I pulled over. The highway was empty. The guardrail was bent in the same place. The grass beyond it had grown wild, tall, and pale. I sat there gripping the wheel until the shaking in my hands stopped being fear and started feeling like surrender. I'm here, I whispered. You wanted me home. I came. The wind didn't answer, but I felt something change in the air, a drop in temperature, a pressure shift like before a storm. I stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel, and walked toward the edge of the bridge. Beneath it, the canyon cut deep into the earth, water far below catching the sunlight like broken glass. And there, at the bottom of the railing, tied around one of the posts, was a strip of mustard yellow fabric. The same jacket. It fluttered weakly in the wind, edges frayed, sun-bleached almost white. I reached out and touched it. The fabric was dry and brittle, like it had been there for years. But the knot was fresh. Someone, or something, had tied it recently. I stood there, heart pounding, staring down at the canyon floor. For a moment, I swore I saw her standing on the opposite ridge, still as stone, hair blowing just enough to prove she was real. My name came faintly through the wind, barely audible but enough to make my knees weak. I shouted, "I'm sorry. I should have stopped you. I should have followed you." The words echoed off the canyon walls, scattered into whispers that didn't sound like my own voice anymore. Then silence, not even wind. And then faintly the air shifted again. Knocking. 3 slow, hollow taps coming from beneath the bridge. I leaned over the edge, breath fogging in the cold air. The sound was rhythmic now, steady, like the world's slow heartbeat. Then I saw it, a shape moving in the shallows below. Not swimming, rising. A pale figure, shoulders first, hair spreading through the water like seaweed. The current pulled it upright until it stood, half submerged, looking up at me. It was her. She looked just like she did the night she died, soaked, shivering, lips blue. But her eyes were alive. She raised her hand, palm open, fingers trembling, and I understood. She wasn't haunting me for revenge. She wanted me to see, to remember what really happened. I backed away slowly, legs shaking, mind unraveling. The air filled with the scent again, that heavy sweetness like lilies rotting in a vase. My vision blurred. The ground seemed to ripple beneath my feet. The last thing I remember before I fell was her mouth opening, forming words that I couldn't hear, and the sound of my own voice whispering, "I never meant to hurt you." When I came to, the world had gone gray. Dusk again, though I didn't remember time passing. I was lying near the guardrail, face pressed into the dirt, rain beginning to fall. The RV sat idling behind me, the headlights glowing faintly like tired eyes. I climbed to my feet, dizzy, drenched, heart still pounding with that same impossible rhythm. The passenger door was open. Inside, the jacket hung neatly over the seat again. But this time, there was something inside one of the pockets. A small cassette tape, unmarked, except for a single handwritten word. Home. I didn't remember owning a cassette player, but the old stereo in the dash had one. My hands were shaking as I slid the tape in. The deck clicked, hissed, then crackled to life. At first, all I heard was static, then a faint voice. "If you're hearing this, you came back." Lydia's voice. I gripped the wheel tighter, my breath caught in my throat. "I knew you'd come back," she said softly. "You were never running from me, Adam. You were running from the part of yourself that couldn't admit what you did. But now you're here, and the road ends where the truth begins." Static filled the next few seconds, then her tone changed. Gentler, almost sad. "There's one more thing you buried. Look under the driver's seat." The tape clicked off. I sat frozen. The air inside the RV felt colder than outside. Slowly, I reached under the seat. My fingers brushed something hard. Metal. I pulled it out. A small key ring, rusted, attached to a motel room tag. Room 6, Canyon View Motel, the same place we'd stayed the week before she died. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to go there. Every cell in my body screamed no. But my hand had already turned the ignition. The drive took less than an hour. The rain followed me the whole way. The motel sat at the edge of town, half collapsed, boarded up, surrounded by weeds. The sign flickered faintly, Canyon View, vacancy. Like it had never stopped waiting for guests. I parked in front of room 6. The number was still painted on the door, barely legible through the grime. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. I unlocked the door. The smell hit first. Mildew, dust, and something else beneath it. Something faintly sweet. Inside, the room was exactly as it had been that last night. The same bedspread, same curtains, same coffee cup on the nightstand. And on the table by the window next to an old rotary phone was a folded shaking hands on the front. I opened it with shaking hands. "You can forgive me now." That's all it said. And then, before I could even process it, the phone on the table rang. One sharp, clear ring that cut through the silence like a scream. I froze, staring at it. The second ring sounded deeper, distorted. The third was more like a knock, low, hollow, familiar. I reached for it. My fingers hovered an inch from the receiver. Then, through the static of the still spinning cassette deck in my pocket, Lydia's voice whispered one last thing. "Don't answer unless you're ready to stay." I left the room. I didn't run. I just walked out into the rain, climbed into the RV, and drove. I didn't care where. I just knew I couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until I understood what home really meant. The road back out of town felt different that night. Wet pavement reflected my headlights in broken streaks, as if the world itself had cracked open and was showing me pieces of something I'd never wanted to see. I didn't play the tape again. Couldn't. I just drove, wipers slapping, heart heavy in that hollow space between grief and surrender. The rain blurred everything, sky, ground, horizon, until it all looked like one gray sheet of motion. I wasn't even sure if I was heading north or south anymore. Every few minutes, the CB radio crackled, even though I hadn't used it in months. Just static. Once, through the hiss, a voice whispered something that almost sounded like, "Turn around." I didn't. Around midnight, the road split. One sign pointed toward Boise, the other toward a place I'd never heard of. Hollow Bend, population 23. Something about the name felt like a dare. I turned without thinking, tires spitting water onto the faded asphalt. The town didn't appear so much as unfold from the dark. A handful of streetlights, a gas station that looked long dead, a diner whose neon open sign flickered weakly in the rain. I pulled up beside it, engine idling, unsure why I'd stopped at all. My reflection in the diner window looked older, harder. I didn't recognize the man staring back. Inside, a single light glowed above the counter. No customers, no sound, but the hum of an old refrigerator. Then a woman's voice said, "Coffee?" I turned. Behind the counter stood a waitress, mid-40s maybe, hair pinned up, name tag rusted with age. The strangest part was that she looked almost like Lydia. Not exactly, but close enough that my breath caught. Same dark eyes, same small scar above her lip. But this woman didn't look haunted. She looked tired. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Coffee's good." She poured it without another word. The cup steamed between us, smelling faintly of burnt toast and rain. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "You've been carrying something heavy." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She shrugged, eyes never meeting mine. "People come through here sometimes, always after dark, always running. You can see it on their faces." She leaned forward slightly. "But you're not running anymore, are you?" I didn't answer. Couldn't, because she was right. Somewhere between Echo Ridge and that motel, the running had stopped. What replaced it was worse. The waiting. I sipped the coffee. Bitter. Real. When I set the cup down, the waitress was gone. I didn't hear her leave. The place was just empty. My cup still steamed. The smell of lilies hung faintly in the air again, sweet and rotting. A chill went through me. On the counter, beside my cup, lay something that hadn't been there before. A folded napkin with a message written in black ink. "The road only ends once." I looked out the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw something moving across the street. A shadow in a long coat, walking slowly toward the RV. The shape stopped beside it, one hand brushing the door. I ran outside, shouting, "Hey!" The figure didn't turn, just stood there. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was my reflection in the RV window, distorted by rain. Except this reflection moved differently. I froze, watching as it raised its hand and knocked 3 times from the inside. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed in my chest. Then the reflection smiled, a strange, tired smile, and stepped backward into the darkness of the RV, vanishing like smoke. I stood there in the rain for a long time, breathing hard, heart slamming against my ribs. Finally, I climbed inside, soaked to the bone. The smell of lilies was stronger now, and sitting in the passenger seat where the jacket used to be was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. I opened it. Inside was a Polaroid, not of Lydia, of me. Asleep, head against the window, the highway stretching behind, written at the bottom in her handwriting, "You can rest now." I looked around the RV. Everything felt still. The engine was off, but the lights glowed faintly. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. I leaned back, exhaustion washing over me. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I let my eyes close. When I woke, sunlight was pouring through the windshield. The storm was gone. The road outside was dry, the air clean, birds sang somewhere in the distance. For a moment, I thought I dreamed it all. But when I stepped out, I realized the diner wasn't there anymore. No building, no sign, just an open field stretching into the horizon. And in the middle of it, a single dirt road winding west. I turned back toward the RV and froze. It wasn't mine. It looked the same at first glance, but the license plate was different. The stickers, the scratches, even the small dent on the rear bumper, it was all reversed, like someone had mirrored my life and parked it here overnight. The driver's door hung open slightly. A breeze moved through it, carrying that faint sweetness again. Something inside me knew what this was. Not a trick, not a haunting, a choice. I climbed in. The interior was spotless, empty. On the table lay a map, hand-drawn, old edges burned. It showed a looping road that began and ended at the same point. The name written in the center was Hollow Bend, my current location. Underneath it, another note. Every road leads home if you stop running. My throat tightened. I folded the map, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and sat behind the wheel. For a long moment, I just watched the horizon shimmer. The fear was still there, but softer now, worn down by something like acceptance. Then I heard it one last time. The knocking. 3 soft taps right beneath the floor. But this time it wasn't angry. It was steady, patient, almost comforting. I whispered, "I'm listening." The air changed, lighter, warmer. A faint breeze moved through the vents, carrying the smell of rain and wildflowers. The dashboard lights flickered once, then steadied. And from somewhere deep beneath the our voice whispered, almost too quiet to hear, then drive. I turned the key. The engine started on the first try. Smooth, strong, familiar. The road ahead was narrow, winding through the hills, sunlight breaking through the clouds like forgiveness itself. I didn't know where it led. Maybe nowhere. Maybe back to the beginning. But for the first time since October began, I didn't care. The world hummed under the tires. The air smelled clean again. The weight in my chest began to lift. Not gone, but lighter, like I could carry it now. As I drove, I glanced once in the mirror. The seat beside me was empty. But on the glass behind it, faint as breath, were words forming slowly in the dust. You made it home. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just kept driving, the way people do when they finally realize that some ghosts don't want revenge, they just want to be remembered right. The sun climbed higher, the road curved west. And for the first time in years, I let it take me wherever it wanted to go.